Show, Jubes and Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 12 o'clock on Friday, the 15th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates.
Policing tweets, not streets. Children as young as 9 are among those being probed by police over non-crime hate incidents, like insults in school playgrounds, or indeed social media posts. What's going on?
And economic growth stalls. The British economy barely grew between July and September. The Chancellor says she's not satisfied.
We're 4 months into this government. There's a lot more to do to turn around the growth performance of the last decade or so.
Theme takes shape. The US president-elect has ruffled feathers by picking vaccine skeptic Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be his new health secretary.
And a migrant crisis. A record number of migrants have been found packed into the same small dinghy, making the dangerous voyage across the Channel.
Farmers' fury. Farmers across the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid. GB News reporter Jack Carson will be live from a farm in Lancashire.
And a blockbuster boxing bout. Mike Tyson takes on YouTuber Jake Paul tomorrow. Will it be the fight of the century or a celebrity circus?
Running through the theme of today's show will be the peculiar state of affairs we've got ourselves into with these so-called non-crime hate incidents. If these incidents are not crimes, as their name would suggest, what on earth is the police doing investigating them?
Exactly. The idea of gathering intelligence is something that you more associate with the secret services rather than police, who are there just to uphold the law. If you've not broken a law, why are the police involved, especially children? Yeah,
I mean, it's crazy enough going after journalists like Alison Pearson, but going against 8-year-old children for playground insults, I mean, this stuff is beyond Orwellian.
And all these crimes, I should say, in inverted commas, are predicated on the fact that there's an intention of hostility behind them. Well, who is there to judge that? Normally, our law is very clear-cut. If you've stolen something, it doesn't matter what your intention was, you've stolen it. Whereas these so-called crimes are about your intention, which, of course, is a thought crime at the end of the day. Well, very worrying.
It's so worrying because it's so subjective. You don't get the clear basis of law on which all sort of Western societies are built. I mean, sort of how we moved on from the sort of medieval era was we stopped having arbitrary rule from people who are unaccountable and moved to defining law. Freedom under law, everyone is under the same law, but if you have subjective views being policed differently, then we're not all under the same law.
And the beauty of this country's legal system that's actually been copied around the world and seen as a real example of great law is the common law system, where everything is allowed except specific things that are banned. And the trouble with speech is, what kind of speech are you trying to ban? And if they're not crimes and never end up in court, fair enough, but then there's still this chilling effect because people then don't dare say what they think because they don't want to knock at the door like Alison Pearson.
Well, what do you think about all of this? Do post your own thought crimes and indeed comments and views. Visit us at gbnews.com/your say. That's all to come after your latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Tom, Miriam, thank you very much. The top stories. The UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the third quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Also responding to the figures this morning, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
Rachel Reeves told City Chiefs she plans to create pension mega-funds that will power growth in the economy and reward British savers. In her first Mansion speech as Chancellor, Ms Reeves announced plans for the mega-funds, which she said could bring in £80 billion to invest in businesses and infrastructure. She addressed issues of financial instability and promised to make economic growth Labour's central mission in the coming years. The mega-funds will mirror schemes in Australia and Canada, where pension funds take advantage of size to invest in assets that have higher growth potential. Now, just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier, people smugglers have launched more small boats from French beaches. GBNews can exclusively reveal that multiple launches were attempted on a stretch of beach south of the French port of Boulogne this morning. A number of the launches were intercepted by French police, and a suspected boat smuggler was also arrested. But at least 2 small boats made it to UK waters, and those on board are being taken by a Border Force vessel to the migrant processing facility at Dover Harbour. The Duke of Sussex is one of 2 claimants whose claims are still live against the publisher of The Sun over allegations of unlawful information gathering, his barrister has told the High Court today. A hearing today heard that Harry and former Labour Deputy Leader Tom Watson are now the only people continuing their claims against the News Group newspapers after several others settled their cases. The 2 remaining cases are expected to go to trial in January, with Harry alleging he was targeted by journalists and private investigators working for NGN, which also published the now-defunct News of the World. The publisher was previously denied unlawful activity took place at The Sun. In other news, television presenter Davina McCall has revealed she's undergoing brain surgery to remove a benign tumour. The 57-year-old shared the news in an Instagram post this morning, saying she has a very rare colloid cyst that affects only 3 in a million people. She explained that she received the diagnosis by chance after booking in for a health scan, adding that she wants the public to pray for her, but that she's also in good spirits. And as you've been hearing in sport, boxing champion Mike Tyson slapped former YouTuber Jake Paul at a charged weigh-in for tonight's controversial heavyweight fight in Texas. After both men had weighed in, Jake Paul crawled across the floor before rising up to Tyson's eye line for the traditional final head-to-head. That's when the 58-year-old Tyson then slapped his opponent across the face, prompting security and team members to rush in to separate them. Paul, however, seemed unfazed. Instead, he blew kisses at the former champion. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 8 minutes past midday. Now, police streets, not tweets. That's the message to the Prime Minister following a rise in police investigations into what are known as non-crime hate incidents.
Yes, and children as young as 9 years old are among the people being probed by police over insults in the school playground and posts online.
So is this a complete waste of police time or a valuable insight into, well, the dangers of our own children?
Well, we're joined now by the Director of Case Management at the Free Speech Union, Dr. Benjamin Jones. Benjamin, thank you so much for joining us. This is something that the Free Speech Union has been concerned about for some time. How extensive is this problem with police recording non-crimes?
In the last 10 years since this concept was introduced in its modern form, 250,000 NCHIs have been recorded against people. Obviously, there's been the story this week of Alison Pearson. There have been numerous incidents that have attracted headlines in recent years. Amber Rudd, for example. There have been ludicrous cases that have crossed our books, so we have helped our members get NCHIs removed from their record. But it's absolutely endemic, and it is not slowing down.
You mentioned the case of Amber Rudd, who, of course, was Home Secretary under Theresa May. Her Conservative Party conference speech was registered as one of these things by some left-wing activist. And, of course, she's not particularly seen as being even on the centre-right of the Conservative Party these days. But what does that actually mean? If someone reports something you, I, or a former Home Secretary says, and it goes off to the police, is there any means of recourse? I mean, do people know if someone has submitted or complained about something they've said?
You are now supposed to be notified, but we do not think that that is happening consistently. And for a very long time, people have not been notified, and it was not the practice that they ought to be notified. And this can have disastrous consequences for people. It's not just that it's a sinister thing that the police are doing that we object to on principled grounds. It has disastrous effects for people's jobs. If you apply for a job that requires an enhanced DBS check, for example, you might only learn during that process that an NCHI has been recorded against you, which might then lead to a job offer being withdrawn. So this is something that is blighting people's lives. It is not just something the police ought not to be doing. It is causing real and tangible harm to people. And as we've seen, this practice is continuing, despite guidance introduced by Suella Braverman that many police forces seem essentially to have flagrantly disregarded. And the number of NCHIs recorded is ticking up every day.
Benjamin, this idea of reporting people for speech or for the police investigating for motive behind speech is completely alien to a British sense of freedom, British culture. You say over the last 10 years, what was it that led to this new guidance or perhaps legislation that police are now following?
Well, I couldn't agree more strongly with the point you've made. I think in the last 10 years, there has unfortunately been an obvious cultural change in which a significant number of people feel that it is right to report people for things they've said with which they disagree or with which they take offence. People are reporting each other to their employers, to the police for NCHIs. And I think one of the problems here, and there are many problems to talk about, but one of them, particularly with respect to the development that NCHIs are being recorded against children or playground incidents, is the police seem to have lost the ability to just say no. If somebody contacts the police and says, "Oh, I'm terribly offended by this. This is a hate incident. It must be recorded. This is absolutely awful that this has happened to me," the police ought to just have the confidence to say, "No, I don't care that you're offended. This isn't a criminal matter. Stop wasting my time."
Is there any reason at all why we have non-crime hate incidents? I suppose it makes sense for the police to be able to keep tabs on people that might commit crimes in the future. Is that one of the justifications why we have this sort of category of non-crime that's logged and registered by the police?
Well, that's the argument for it, that it allows the police to build up intelligence on people who, as you say, are likely to then go on to commit crimes. But clearly there has been substantial mission creep if we've got to the point where schoolgirls are having NCHIs recorded against them for saying that other people smell like fish. The police have lost all sense of proportionality. The guidance isn't being followed, and it seems quite likely that the government intends, or at least intended, to water the guidance down to make it easier to record NCHIs against people.
I should just say that some of these police forces have pushed back against that accusation that they're not following the guidance. West Yorkshire Police Force, which has itself logged complaints against children, has said that its crime recording had been judged as outstanding by His Majesty's Inspectorate of Constabulary and Fire and Rescue Services, said it meant that the force may record higher levels of hate offending. So these police forces do think they're doing the right thing by the rules.
I think the police have completely lost their sense of perspective, both about hate crimes, but certainly about non-crime hate incidents. And increasingly, I'm afraid to say that the police are acting almost like a state militia, clamping down on freedom of speech, particularly freedom of speech that is critical of multiculturalism. Now we have these revelations about NCHIs being recorded against schoolgirls. We've had, of course, in the last 2 or 3 days, the case of Alison Pearson, the Telegraph journalist, who may or may not have an NCHI recorded against her. Certainly there's a live investigation of some kind going on by the police against her. I think the police argument in support of NCHIs in this regime, it doesn't hold water whatsoever. The police have completely lost any sense of perspective about freedom of speech. And we actually did some research into where the police forces in England and Wales were training officers on freedom of speech, and 80% offer no training on freedom of speech whatsoever. So your average police officer is going to be put through a raft of equality, diversity and inclusion training. They're going to be told about the importance of NCHIs, the importance of tackling hate in our communities and all the rest of it, but could go through a substantial period of training and never encounter any defence of freedom of speech. And this is causing an abject disaster in policing in this country.
Dr. Benjamin James, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there, but thank you so much for joining us today. Very concerning. And of course, the Free Speech Union are involved with representing many people who've been caught up under these rules and this policing. Very, very worrying indeed.
Absolutely, but we're moving on now because United Kingdom growth, yes, it's the size of our economy. Well, the growth in that has slowed down for the first 3 months of the new government.
And this comes despite Labour's mission to deliver the highest sustained growth in the G7.
Well, earlier we spoke to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and our political correspondent, Catherine Forster, asked, when will we start to see any economic growth at all? And when will people start to feel the effects of that growth? Well, here's what she had to say.
Is the number one mission of this new government. We want that growth to be felt more quickly by families up and down the country, which is why in our first week in government I set out an ambitious set of planning reforms and the creation of a national wealth fund. And it's why in my Mansion House speech last night I announced some of the biggest reforms of our pension system in a generation to unlock long-term patient capital up to £80 billion to help invest in small businesses and scale-up businesses and in the infrastructure needs.
Well, we're joined now by an economist, Jonathan Davis. Jonathan, thank you very much for joining us. It's not great news for the economy and not great news for Labour.
The economy is slowing. The economy has been slow for years. This might be a surprise to some people, but to me, there's very little difference between the main parties in terms of economics. There's been a couple of shibboleths for years. The health service and net zero, they've been handed vast amounts of money, our money. That's continuing. The NHS is going to get another £25 billion. Net zero is going to get another £100 billion. When that sort of thing happens, when the public sector is boosted, when government spending and borrowing and taxes rise, it doesn't help the economy.
Of course, Jonathan, what the Labour Party might say is that they've been in office for just over 3 months or 4 months, and really they haven't had any time to take effect of any of their policies yet. So this is sort of still the same statute book that we saw under the previous government. Are you suggesting here that actually the sort of mood music or the words of politicians and expectations can feed into this sort of thing?
No, I'm saying policies feed into this kind of thing, as well as global economics. What we will see over the next 6, 12, 24 months is slowing economic growth. I'm not predicting a recession, but rising inflation, thus, on a net basis, growth is going to be hardly non-existent. And that's the same basically across the world. Inflation rising and growth slowing. There's not a great deal that this or the previous government is doing that's any different to anyone else. Except, of course, they're raising taxes and they're pushing inflationary policies. Inflation never helps an economy. I can't think of a single economy on the planet historically that has done well in inflationary circumstances. And inflation is going to rise and it's going to harm economic growth. Now, there will be winners. As I say, the health services, the public sector will do very well. So what's new? Net zero will do very well and anything associated. But I think there'll be big losers. I'm thinking the housing market, for example, with higher inflation, the expectation for much lower interest rates will be reduced. In other words, there won't be many interest rate cuts. Thus, housing will be negatively affected. And I think that will spill over to retail, which, in other words, is the ordinary man and woman in the street.
Well, Jonathan...
there will be winners and losers. Overall, there will be slower growth and higher inflation.
And Jonathan, economists get worried about these GDP figures, GDP per capita, overall GDP. But as you say, to people at home, inflation is the most important metric. How much is a basket of goods going to cost? And you mentioned there's no difference between the major parties now. The one thing nobody's really talking about is the public debt and the amount that we're having to pay in tax just to service that debt. Do you see any sign of mainstream parties being concerned about the national debt?
On the contrary, I see them continuing to want to borrow more to fund their favourite political sectors and areas that win them votes. Politicians, come on, let's face it, politicians are not there to help us. They're there to help themselves. They're there to help the elite, or as I call them, the parasites, and the political class and everything a couple of miles around Westminster. That's what politics is about. It has been for the last 30 plus years. Now, of course, interestingly, whether or not it's true, the Trump guys are saying we're going to do it differently. And if they do, then that will have a major positive effect on the global economy. But it is yet to see whether or not they're actually going to be true to their word.
OK, well, Jonathan Davis, economist, thank you so much for your insight and expertise there. Really appreciate it. Now, we must say that there has been an update in the last hour or so. The website Guido Fawkes has been scouring the Chancellor's CV, and it seems that Rachel Reeves has made a change to her CV. She claimed for years and years that she worked as an economist at HBOS before joining the Bank of England. But look at this. This is her LinkedIn profile. She's changed the word economist to the words retail banking.
And I think, was this change made last night, Tom? Is that correct?
It was noticed last night. But this was clearly the Chancellor saying she was an economist for 3 years. Now she says she worked in retail banking for 3 years.
You wonder what has precipitated the change.
It's
whether a question has been asked or...
Well,
it's Guido missed a thing there.
Part of it could have been the story that appeared in Guido last month, pointing out the team that Rachel Reeves worked in at HBOS was actually a complaints team rather than the economics team, working with administration and IT matters. But of course, we've asked the Chancellor for her response for this curious change to her CV. We'll be keeping an eye on this story on Good Afternoon Britain.
Well, who'd be a politician, hey? Every move is checked over. Well, lots more coming up on today's show. 98 migrants have been found packed into one small dinghy, making the crossing across the Channel. We'll have the latest details.
Headliners. Tomorrow's papers tonight. Every night from 11 p.m.
Telegraph now with bra news. And Lewis, do you remember when you took your girlfriend for her first fitting?
This is M&S Transro. I've got a youngish girlfriend. But
She was youngish when you first met her 20 years ago.
Yes, stay young. I don't know. I don't even want to read it. So it's so pervy. It sounds pervy. If I think it's pervy, it's probably very pervy.
Okay.
It says it's first bras for young things. They can't even say young girls.
Well, let's have a look at it. It is it's upsetting. Strong, smart, strong, supported. First bras for fearless young things. So this has been picked up. Actually, Bev Turner from GBNews took a photo of it, put it online. It's created a bit of a furore.
First of all, those kind of bras are basically unnecessary. They were when I was that age.
Wearing your bra.
Yeah, those bras. They used to call them training bras, and I don't know if they really were necessary at that time because they didn't have like.
You've really got to the heart of this, haven't you?
This is the one time I'm not going to interrupt you.
Yeah, it's not. No, they're not really necessary. It's like it's not. Because otherwise...
So really, this is a non-story.
Okay.
Well, yeah. I think it's... I don't know. I mean, there was a little bit of me that was kind of like, pick your battles. Is this the hill to die on? I don't know.
The young things, they're saying I would say it's a dodgy advert anyway, it feels like, because saying young things feels like... It's as it says, like objective. It's sort of saying that they're objects.
Yes, but this is my point about the West. Like, are you aware of a company called Pretty Little Thing? Do you know what I'm talking about? Like, one of the major brands for young women in this country is called Pretty Little Thing. I just think that's hilarious. Where were the feminists when they named that? So you go on the tube any day of the week and it says Pretty Little Thing, and there's these women in tiny dresses, and I don't know.
GBNews, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking...
This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth.
It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel. And as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 26 minutes past midday. Now, just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier, people smugglers have launched yet more small boats from French beaches.
Well, this comes after 98 migrants were found packed into one small dinghy while making their very dangerous voyage across the Channel. This is the biggest number to attempt to cross the Channel in a single boat.
Well, joining us now is our Home and Security editor, Mark White. Mark, I thought it was mission accomplished.
Well, I think what this shows is, there's no easy fix to this problem. Yes, you can take out one supplier, and it might be a major supplier of these small boats, but the people smuggling gangs, the organised criminal groups, are just that, very organised. They've had 6 years to get very well-established supply lines in place. The boats are made to order in backstreet factories in China. They're sent to Turkey, and then they make it by land into Europe, up to Germany usually, and then they're transported across to the beaches of northern France on the day that they're due to be launched. And yes, you can take one person out and you can describe him as significant in Downing Street press conferences. But the fact is, he'll be very quickly replaced, and indeed has been very quickly replaced, because there are plenty of other suppliers that the criminal gangs can go to.
Well, that's why this model is so successful from the people smugglers' point of view. It's low tech, it's low cost, they don't need aeroplanes, they don't need advanced technology, it's not very expensive, it is just small dinghies. So how on earth do the government think that just taking out a few different suppliers here and there is going to make a difference, when at the end of the day, these people smugglers still think, and the people coming across on boats, that they can make a new life here in Britain without any barriers once they get here?
It's a very good point, isn't it? And that's why many people are saying, including, of course, the new head of the government's Border Security Command, Martin Hewitt, that a deterrent will probably be required alongside the law enforcement side of the operation, to ensure that you're not just disrupting the gangs, but you're putting people off from coming because there is a deterrent processing in a third country or whatever that deterrent might be. But what we can say about today is that first thing this morning, just south of the port of Boulogne, multiple small boats were launched from the beaches. A number of those boats were intercepted by the French police on the beaches. One of the boats at least was punctured, as they do to stop them crossing, but at least 2 boats got into the water and made it to the UK side of the English Channel. One of those Border Force vessels, Typhoon, is just as we speak entering Dover Harbour with the latest batch of migrants on board, which is going to take us up to 33,000 for the year so far. 20% ahead of where we were last year. So there's been no slowdown in the numbers crossing since Labour took over, despite their avowed aim to smash the gangs.
Yeah. Why do you think it was that Keir Starmer called this extraordinary press conference yesterday, gathered the nation's media together in a room, only to say, we've arrested 1 man? I mean, did he think this was the equivalent of the assassination of Osama bin Laden? Did he think it was that significant? I mean, this is one guy who supplied boats. Why did he call a press conference for it?
Well, originally we were told it was the Home Secretary that would make some comments, and then it appears Downing Street decided that they wanted to muscle in on the action, and so Keir Starmer to deliver what, as you say, looked like a very, very serious notification from the government about the progress they'd made. And the fact is, it's one supplier, and yes, he may have been supplying dozens of boats, maybe more, to people smugglers, but there are many, many others out there. It's just one cog in the wheel in terms of the people smuggling industry that is a multinational industry worth billions of pounds with lots of different elements there willing to step in and supply the boats and other equipment that's required when one
And there's a
person's
huge
taken out.
security aspect to this as well, because it's not just the unfairness of people being able to come over here and have access to benefits and health and things like that. Some of these people potentially are very dangerous people. Is the government worried about this?
Yeah, I mean, quite a number are dangerous in terms of people that go on to commit offences, and then there's a smaller proportion that go on to commit serious offences, and we know even acts of terrorism have been committed by those that have come across the channel illegally into the UK in recent years. And one of the concerns is, of course, they throw away their identity documents, so getting a handle on who they actually are and the potential threat they might pose is very difficult. And many of them, they'll come from countries that are very dysfunctional. Maybe they've witnessed a lot in their lifetime that has made them perhaps susceptible to psychological issues that cause them to go on and commit, very serious crimes. So, yes, of course, there's great deal of concern about who actually is coming across, who we're accepting in to the country.
No, it's a huge, huge story. It's not going away. Mark White, thank you for the very, very latest.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. We've got lots more coming up for you on today's show. Why have Donald Trump's nominees for his top team ruffled feathers? We'll find out.
And farmers across the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid. We'll be live at a farm in Lancashire.
Good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. Well, the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the third quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns for savers, but crucially, to free up investment, to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Also responding to those figures this morning, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
And snow and ice could cause disruption across northern parts of the UK next week. The Met Office has issued a yellow warning for parts of northern England and southern Scotland on Monday and Tuesday, with up to 20 centimetres of snow possible on higher ground. Forecasters warn there's a small chance of up to 10 centimetres of snow settling at lower levels, which could also prove disruptive. The warning covers much of southern Scotland and northeast England, parts of Yorkshire and parts of the northwest of England, including Lancashire and Cumbria, and is in force from 10 a.m. on Monday for 24 hours. A separate warning for snow and ice is in place in northern Scotland from 4 p.m. on Sunday until 11 a.m. on Monday. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another quiet day for many of us, with some bright spells, especially in the south, but a lot of cloud for many, and some outbreaks of rain in the northwest, but most especially the far northwest of Scotland, with this cold front approaching. Now, this cold front is going to introduce a significant change in the weather during the weekend and into early next week. But for the time being, we keep high pressure, we keep things relatively benign. There has been some fog and frost in the southwest first thing. That'll tend to lift. And then bright spells for the south, but areas of cloud floating about. The thickest cloud will be in the far north, where it's going to be raining and windy, feeling unpleasant as that rain moves in for northern and northwest Scotland. Drizzly for the southwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England, but the heaviest rain will affect the northwest of Scotland as we end the afternoon and go into the evening. Gusty winds associated with this as well, some clear spells there for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise a lot of cloud for the northern half of the UK. Nevertheless, we keep some clear spells going into the night time across the south, and because of that, once again, temperatures will fall away and some fog and frost patches will form. But the front that's bringing the heavy rain to northwest Scotland tends to sink south overnight into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and then eventually northern England by dawn. A relatively weak feature, but it is going to bring a spell of rain and gusty winds, and it's introducing much colder air to parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland for the start of Saturday. In fact, we'll see a mix of rain, sleet and hail showers at lower levels for northern Scotland and some snow over the hills. The winds picking up strength as well, with gales for the far north of Scotland. Meanwhile, much lighter winds further south, with a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of mostly light rain moving south. Highs of 13 Celsius in the south.
The latest GB News travel.
Northbound on the M1, a lane closure and speed restrictions of 50 miles an hour to roadworks between 30 for Sheffield South to Sheffield at 31. Expect delays. It is slow for the northbound side of the M1 as there is a lane closure on the exit slip road at 13 to Bedford to a broken down vehicle. In Buckinghamshire and Hedgley, the A355 Collinswood Road is closed to an accident. The closure is in both directions between Burnham Road through to the Hedgley turnoff. In the eastbound side of the M56, there is a partial block there. That is due to an obstruction on the road. That's from Chester Services at junction 14 through to Runcorn at junction 12. It has cleared on the M4 though, an earlier issue around Port Talbot at junction 41. So for now, that's your very latest travel news.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past midday. Now, over across the other side of the Atlantic, Donald Trump is ruffling feathers as he reveals more picks for his top team.
The US president-elect has chosen Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his new health secretary, a job that will see him take charge of areas such as drugs, food and vaccine safety.
Well, it comes also as Trump has appointed Tulsi Gabbard as his US intelligence chief. She's, of course, a former Democrat who's been under some accusations of being soft on the Russians. It's sparking concerns that the intelligence community will become increasingly politicised.
Well, joining us now is Republican political analyst Virginia Tuckey. I think she's joining us from Argentina. Hello, Virginia. Thank you so much for joining us. Are these appointments as controversial as being made out? Are they really a surprise following Trump's campaign?
Well, thank you for inviting me. Yes, I'm from Argentina. I'm here in Buenos Aires. And yes, it is controversial because it's Donald Trump's nominations. And, you know, he always plays hard. And it's controversial, but it's necessary because the system is quite rotten in the United States and it needs to be fixed, okay? So these are the right people to fix them. So, of course, we can agree in some things, we cannot agree in others, but America has a very strong institutional frame, so everything can be done yet, everything can be fixed yet. And this is the right people, I guess. Gates, for example, for the Department of the Attorney General, and Susan Wiles, and everyone he selected. Yes, there were some surprises there, but I think he did the right thing. He learned the lesson because on his first presidency, he made some bad choices and it costed him, you know, the election, and he lost a lot of years being prosecuted for false accusations. So, yes, it's controversial, but it's necessary.
It's particularly ideologically consistent, though. I mean, you look at people like RFK Jr. He's been a big voice on the importance of climate change policies. He's been a Democrat for, well, almost his entire political life, been in favour of perhaps more spending and more regulations. And then you have people like Elon Musk, who's completely the opposite, who's saying absolutely bonfire of the regulations, free the economy. I mean, looking at all of these picks, I think perhaps the only thing that connects all of these people is that they've been sort of quite nice to Donald Trump. They've been praising Donald Trump. Is this just a bit of a sort of royal court of only people who'll be the yes men, who'll say, Donald, you're brilliant, and if they say that, then they're in? Is that the only thing connecting these people?
Well, you have Kennedy is going to take care of the Department of Health. And he wants to cut, you know, all the unnecessary spending. He wants to revise many regulations. So that specifically makes sense because it's not out of the Republican program. It's not out of anything that Donald Trump promised. And Elon Musk is there also to cut, you know, this big state that is just interrupting and making the life of Americans harder each day, okay? And so, I mean, Kennedy, yes, he has a lot of controversial points of view. I don't agree with him in a lot of things. Many Republicans don't agree with him, for example, in these, you know, environmental opinions, but he's not there for that. He's there for taking care of a department that has been shown to be, you know, not necessary because it is, but very dysfunctional. And during the pandemics, you saw how they managed to write guidelines that then didn't, you know, bring anything good for the society and for the world. So, yes, he wants to revise everything. He wants to cut the department in half. And he wants to revise the guidelines and promote through the budget to promote good health through natural, you know, recipes if you
Virginia,
want.
I think we're going to have to leave it there, sadly, but thank you so much for your time and fascinating...
Thank you for having me.
Fascinating developments. And yes, of course, loyalty seems to be one of them, but also about being robust enough to stand up to the establishment. That seems to be the theme, I think.
Yes, although, I mean, would Donald Trump have put Robert F. Kennedy Jr. there had he not endorsed him? Had he not? Was there a deal that was done before the election? Kennedy was running himself. He dropped out, endorsed Donald Trump. Was there a quid pro quo there?
Potentially.
I think
but people's main criticism seems to be that these are not experienced people. But the problem is the people with experience are part of the establishment and much more reluctant to shake things up, perhaps. Who knows? Other views are available.
Some of these appointments might be more competent than others.
We'll see. Time will tell.
But of course, let's all come back to this side of the Atlantic now, because farmers up and down the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid on the agricultural sector. That protest coming next week.
Well, joining us now is GB News reporter Jack Carson, who is live from a farm in Lancashire. Jack, great to see you. The weather's not looking all that great. What's life like on the farm?
Well, it's been such an interesting day already. I was there at 6 a.m. this morning helping to feed the cows, and the farmer was telling me he'd already been up since 1 a.m. So these people really do work, you know, almost 24 hours a day, really, when you come to think of it. They're always on alert 24 hours a day to make sure that whether it's their livestock, like the livestock farm we've been at today, or whether it's other parts of their farm, that they're always aware and alert, ready to go at a moment's notice. But it's a knock-on impact, really, that this inheritance tax change could well have. We're here at Guy's Machinery, who, sell machinery to these farmers, and there is a worry about what happens to those farms if they do end up having to split up because of this change. Rachel Reeves earlier has been defending this decision. Take a look at what she told GB News.
If you're a couple who own a farm, including a home on the farm, you can pass on £3 million tax-free to the next generation. And beyond that £3 million, you are stuck half of the rate that everybody else is taxed for inheritance tax, at 20% compared to 40%. And where there is an inheritance tax bill, you can pay that over 10 years interest-free in a way that no one else paying inheritance tax can. So I think this is a fair deal for farmers, whilst also ensuring that we bring in the money to get our public finances back on a firm footing.
Well, you can hear there the defence from Rachel Reeves over this policy, but there are so many concerns with the farmers that we've been speaking to today, but also with business. Let's go and speak to Mark Mabry, who's the after-sales manager here at Guy Machinery. I mean, Mark, just tell us a little bit about the impact that if some of these farms start to close, if they start to sell up, what's going to be the impact on a business like yours?
It's a massive impact. I mean, already in the last 2 years, you've seen a turn down due to the people not knowing the outcomes of the subsidies and everything else. And then to throw this on top of it, you're expecting people to invest in new tackle and new machinery when they don't know what's going to happen in the future. That people are going to start holding on to the money, holding money back, and because they just don't know which way to go.
I mean, what kind of conversations are you already having, with farmers? Are there people already that are thinking, I might not go ahead with that purchase, or I might have bought it next year, but now I'm not so sure?
Yeah, there's already that, that conversation been had with, normally we change the trailer every 2-3 years, or the rowing up machine 4 or 5 years. They're just going to make it run on longer because they don't know what's happening. All this machinery is here, it's costing every day, same as a lot of other dealerships up and down the country. And, it's bound to have a knock on you. You've got to feed your family. Where does the food come from? So the first thing they're thinking about is, where's the money coming from? So we've got to keep investing in the farm, make a do with old tackle and just keep going. There's no real moving forward looking. It's a very bleak future at the moment.
Mark, thank you so much for that quite honest, honest opinion of really the reality that, it's not just farmers, but it's that chain as you soon to get down it with businesses like Guy Machinery here in Lancashire. They are concerned about the future.
Well, Jack Carson, thank you very much for bringing us that live from Lancashire. Really appreciate it.
Well, you're watching Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more to come up on today's show.
Yes, the television presenter Davina McCall has revealed she's got a brain tumour. We'll bring you the details on that next.
Britain's newsroom, weekday mornings from 9:30.
This is one of those angles, really. There's going to be so many different sort of tentacles which go from Donald Trump winning, and where this leads for the royal family. Where's it going to lead for Harry?
Well,
put it this way, Harry's just bought a house in Portugal, and it might come in pretty handy in the next few months, because Donald Trump has said in the past that he wouldn't protect Harry, that he would be on his own, and that if it was down to me, this is Donald Trump, if it was down to me, he wouldn't have any protection. And the Heritage Foundation tried to expose his form, and in the end, he was protected, and a judge ruled that the form would never be revealed. I just wonder whether now Trump is in power, I'm not saying it's top of his priority list, but eventually that form might be exposed.
And just so to remind viewers and listeners, Charlotte, in his book Spare, in which he, of course, dumped tons of abuse on his own family, Harry admitted to taking illegal drugs such as cocaine.
Yes, and there have been, you know, I better not name her, but there's been a certain supermodel who has been exposed for taking cocaine. She couldn't go into America for 10 years. It doesn't matter how famous you are, you can't take drugs and go into America. They're very strict on this. So if Harry didn't tick that box, and then he wrote in Spare that he's taken magic mushrooms, marijuana and cocaine, it wasn't a very clever move.
Oh, the implications, though, of Donald Trump saying that Harry can't live in America, like the political ramifications of that. I can't see Starmer handling that very well.
No, and well, he just might say he wants people in America who've told the truth about drug taking, and he's got zero tolerance on illegal drug taking, Trump.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent?
I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to Good Afternoon Britain. It's 12:51 and TV presenter Davina McCall has revealed that she's undergoing brain surgery to remove a benign tumour.
Well, joining us now is the former deputy showbiz editor at The Sun, Carl Stroud. Carl, this is a concerning time for Davina.
Yeah, it really is a worrying time for her. She revealed the news this morning to her followers on Instagram that this benign tumour, and that's important to kind of stress, this benign tumour has been discovered, and she will be undergoing surgery to have it removed.
And these surgeries are not without risk, even though this tumour is benign.
No, absolutely not. No, she's undergoing a procedure called a craniotomy, where a surgeon will remove a portion of her skull to get to this tumour, which is 14 millimetres in size, and remove it there. And it's an incredibly rare tumour. It's a 3 in a million chance of ever developing this thing. So this is very kind of serious health risk to Davina, really undergoing very kind of extensive surgery.
And obviously she's a popular and well-known figure, like all celebrities now, is having to reveal quite a lot of details about her health to explain a period of not working, not a period of not being on our screens. We've seen this with the royal family as well this year. Do you think we've got the balance right with the kind of transparency and intrusiveness that celebrities have to endure now?
Well, this is a question here, and Davina recently, over recent years, has kind of reinvented herself as someone who talks extensively around well-being and health, particularly women's health. She's a real kind of advocate for better understanding of the menopause. So I think this really kind of connects back to that around her kind of crusade to sort of demystify a lot of these kind of health issues, and in this instance, she's using her own personal health challenges to do just that, to raise awareness and to kind of explain, as you say, her absences from the public eye in the near future.
Well, it must be an incredibly tough time for her and her family. But Carl Stroud, former showbiz editor at The Sun, thanks so much for your time on this issue. I suppose all of our best wishes go out to Davina.
Absolutely, and I'm sure she'll keep us updated. She issued a video on social media this morning where she talked about the fact that it was benign but still needed removing, but obviously hugely concerning. So thoughts and prayers with her for her swift recovery.
Absolutely. But do stick with us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Plenty more to come on today's programme. We're going to be diving back into our top issue of the day, this issue of non-crime hate incidents. And just what are they?
Yes, and should children ever be referred to the police for things that they say in the classroom? We'll be talking to experts on this issue later, and please do keep telling us your points of view. We'll be back soon.
Absolutely, that's all to come after your latest weather forecast.
A chilly start will give way to a lovely, warm afternoon. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another quiet day for many of us, with some bright spells, especially in the south, but a lot of cloud for many, and some outbreaks of rain in the northwest, but most especially the far northwest of Scotland, with this cold front approaching. Now, this cold front is going to introduce a significant change in the weather during the weekend and into early next week. But for the time being, we keep high pressure, we keep things relatively benign. There has been some fog and frost in the southwest first thing. That'll tend to lift. And then bright spells for the south, but areas of cloud floating about. The thickest cloud will be in the far north, where it's going to be raining and windy, feeling unpleasant as that rain moves in for northern and northwest Scotland. Drizzly for the southwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England, but the heaviest rain will affect the northwest of Scotland as we end the afternoon and go into the evening. Gusty winds associated with this as well. Some clear spells there for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise a lot of cloud for the northern half of the UK. Nevertheless, we keep some clear spells going into the night time across the south, and because of that, once again, temperatures will fall away and some fog and frost patches will form. But the front that's bringing the heavy rain to northwest Scotland tends to sink south overnight into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and then eventually northern England by dawn. A relatively weak feature, but it is going to bring a spell of rain and gusty winds, and it's introducing much colder air to parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland for the start of Saturday. In fact, we'll see a mix of rain, sleet and hail showers at lower levels for northern Scotland and some snow over the hills. The winds picking up strength as well, with gales for the far north of Scotland. Meanwhile, much lighter winds further south, with a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of mostly light rain moving south. Highs of 13 Celsius in the south.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
This is GB News, Britain's news channel.
online dating apps are still the go-to for millions of British adults, with 1 in 10 using them to look for a romantic connection.
Yes, are you one of them? Let us know. But with many apps introducing subscription fees and complex algorithms, the world of online dating has never been harder to navigate. So who better to join us to discuss this than Mr. Tinder himself, Stefan Pierre Tomlin. You have been dubbed Britain's best-looking eligible bachelor.
Yeah, so this happened back in 2016. Got an email from Tinder, and it was like, "You're the most swiped man on Tinder."
So just explain to us, for viewers who don't know, what is swiping? What does that mean on Tinder?
Yeah, so on Tinder, the app, if you swipe left, that means you don't like the person in front of you, and if you swipe to the right, that means you like that person.
Do you mind still being associated with that? It's a good thing.
Well, I mean, yeah, it made me who I am now, and I love sharing how I was successful, and now I'm like a dating expert.
What's your situation now? Are you with anyone? Are you still single, paying the bill?
So I'm seeing someone at the minute. Things are going well, and I'm a dating expert, so I'm always giving advice to people.
Does she know your title of most swiped?
Of course, who doesn't?
Yeah,
it's quite hard. It's quite hard being the most swiped man on Tinder because you get a label on you. So I find it harder than anyone else, to be honest.
And where did you meet her? That's the big question.
At an event.
So not on Tinder?
Not on Tinder, ironically. Yeah.
So for all that troubled online, it's actually a real life rendezvous. Which
I mean, I have met people on Tinder in the past, and it has worked. Well, it didn't work, but yeah.
I need to know how to do the famous Stefan Smolder.
That camera is not a camera. That is your best friend, that's your lover. So you really smiles from the camera, so it goes like this.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1 o'clock on Friday, the 15th of November. I'm Miriam Cates.
And I'm Tom Harwood.
Well, policing the tweets, not the streets, children as young as 9 are among those being probed by police over non-crime hate incidents like insults in the school playground and social media posts. What is going on?
Economic growth stalls. Yes, the British economy barely grew between July and September, indeed contracted in September. The Chancellor says she's not satisfied.
We're 4 months into this government. There's a lot more to do to turn around the growth performance of the last decade or so.
And farmers' fury. Farmers across the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid. We'll hear from farmers in Lancashire.
The Chancellor changes her CV. Yes, Rachel Reeves has reportedly been caught changing her CV on LinkedIn. She now claims that she wasn't an economist at HBOS. We'll get to the bottom of the mystery.
And a blockbuster boxing bout. Mike Tyson takes on YouTuber Jake Paul tomorrow. Will it be the fight of the century or a celebrity circus? Well, please do continue to send your views and post comments about the show by visiting gbnews.com/your say. And of course, one of the big stories that we're covering is this free speech row. We'll have more of that later.
It's such a big issue because, well, let's be honest. In the newsroom, we were thinking, do we go with economic growth stats or do we go with this free speech row? But I think we know that the economy's in the doldrums, and we know that sort of this that we've had stalling and stuttering growth. Is it minus 0.1 or plus 0.1? I mean, does that really make that much difference? But this issue of children in the school playground having police reports written up about nasty words that they've said, about taunting words that they've said, about normal children behaviour. Some of these words are common on the television, on sort of, well, I should say on the television, on American television. We've been advised we're not allowed to say them.
And as a parent of teenagers, this really worries me because, You know, of course, children, we all say things that we regret sometimes, but also in an increasingly polarised world, one person's truth will be the other person's insult. And the idea that your child might get a visit from the police by just telling the truth is really, really very worrying, very Kafkaesque, as Alison Pearson did say.
Absolutely. But of course, as Miriam was saying, do post your own non-crime hate incidents in the GB News comment section, gbnews.com/yoursay. And we'll get to all of that, of course, after your very latest headlines with Tatiana Sanchez.
Tom, thank you very much. The top stories. While the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan. But instead, the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the third quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Well, also responding to those figures this morning, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they are extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, you know, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
Rachel Reeves told City Chiefs she plans to create pension mega funds that will power growth in the economy and reward British savers. In her first Mansion House speech as Chancellor, Ms Reeves announced plans for the mega funds, which she said could bring in £80 billion to invest in businesses and infrastructure. She addressed issues of financial instability and promised to make economic growth Labour's central mission in the coming years. The mega funds will mirror schemes in Australia and Canada, where pension funds take advantage of size to invest in assets that have higher growth potential. Now, just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier, people smugglers have launched more small boats from French beaches. GB News can reveal that multiple launches were attempted on a stretch of beach south of the French port of Boulogne this morning. A number of the launches were intercepted by French police and a suspected boat smuggler was arrested. But at least 2 small boats made it to UK waters, and those on board are being taken by a Border Force vessel to the migrant processing facility at Dover Harbour. The Home Office spent £15 million buying a derelict prison contaminated with asbestos amid political pressure to stop housing migrants in hotels, according to Whitehall's spending watchdog. The National Audit Office says the government department cut corners and paid more than it needed to in order to acquire the North Eye site in Bexhill-on-Sea in East Sussex. It said this was ultimately deemed unfit for its intended purpose due to contamination. A report published today shows the site was bought for around £6.3 million, but the Home Office completed the sale in September last year for around £15.4 million. The Duke of Sussex is one of 2 claimants whose claims are still live against the publisher of The Sun over allegations of unlawful information gathering, his barrister has told the High Court today. A hearing today heard that Harry and former Labour Deputy Leader Tom Watson are now the only people continuing their claims against News Group newspapers after several others had settled their cases. The 2 remaining cases are expected to go to trial in January, with Harry alleging he was targeted by journalists and private investigators working for NGN, which also published the now-defunct News of the World. The publisher has previously denied unlawful activity took place at The Sun. Television presenter Davina McCall has revealed she's undergoing brain surgery to remove a benign tumour. The 57-year-old shared the news in an Instagram post this morning, saying she has a very rare colloid cyst that affects only 3 in a million people. She explained that she received the diagnosis by chance after booking in for a health scan, adding that she wants the public to pray for her, but that she's in good spirits. A memorial service for Alex Salmond will be live streamed to the public on St Andrew's Day, the former First Minister's family has announced. Mr Salmond will be honoured at St Giles's Cathedral in Edinburgh on the 30th of November at 11 a.m. The 69-year-old died on October 12th in North Macedonia after suffering a heart attack. A private family funeral was held near his home. On October the 29th, a public memorial service was later confirmed. The late politician's family said they've been overwhelmed with public interest in those wishing to attend the service, which was invite-only. And in sport, boxing champion Mike Tyson slapped Jake Paul at a charged weigh-in for tonight's controversial heavyweight fight in Texas. After both men had weighed in, Jake Paul crawled across the floor before rising up to Tyson's eye line for the traditional final head-to-head. And that's when the 58-year-old Tyson then slapped his opponent across the face, prompting security and team members to rush in to separate them. Paul, however, seemed unfazed. Instead, he blew kisses at the former champion. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. More news in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 1. Now on to policing streets rather than tweets. That's the message to the Prime Minister following a rise in police investigations into so-called non-crime hate incidents.
Well, children as young as 9 years old are revealed to be among the people being probed by police over insults in the school playground and posts online.
The Home Office is now reviewing how police record non-crime hate incidents, while police forces across the country say they're acting in a more proportionate way.
But is investigating these non-crime hate incidents a good use of police time? Well, joining us now is Alka Siegel-Cuthbert from Don't Divide Us. Thank you so much, Alka, for joining us. Why are children being reported to the police for things that they say in the classroom and the playground?
Well, I think this really speaks to a problem that is really under-discussed today, and that's a problem of adult authority, and particularly problems teachers face in exerting their authority in schools. I mean, they have 2 jobs. One is to educate through a knowledge-rich curriculum, and the other is to socialise, to create a community where, adults are expected and accepted as being in charge, and part of that is maintaining standards of decent conduct and appropriate disciplining when needed. But I think there are 3 kind of main problems, 3 beliefs that really mark our cultural life today that make that task really difficult. And that what that means is that teachers are preferring, or schools are preferring, to outsource their authority. I think just very briefly, the 3 kind of problematic beliefs are: 1, there's too much wrong pressure, if you like, on schools and teachers to be the be-all and end-all of all life chances. It's like if you don't get a slate of 9 A stars, then you're doomed forever. It's not in the power of schools to deliver that kind of outcome, and I think pretending that schools can do that just is another source of undermining teachers' confidence. There's a second belief that children's psychological and emotional development requires adults to retreat from exerting their authority and finding other more technical, kind of sneaky ways of trying to control. And I think here, what happens in schools when that is really dominant. I mean, I've worked in many, many schools as a teacher, and this is kind of like the norm. What happens is that discipline then becomes much more arbitrary and inconsistent. And what happens is, it kind of encourages individual strategies of survival among teachers, and it encourages pupils to play off one teacher against another. And they'll sort of listen to the ones they like, but kind of totally disrespect, ones they don't like.
So are you suggesting that teachers essentially take the easy option, and instead of having more traditional strategies for teaching virtues and managed behaviour, they just refer children who they see as problematic to the police?
well, they refer them upwards, and that goes upwards to the police eventually. But I think I don't want to, the point is there's also the third thing that is really important. It's not, I don't want to kind of bash teachers. I mean, I've been a teacher, I am a teacher. I think you've been a teacher too, Miriam, but you can see there's also a kind of lack of esprit de corps amongst the profession. And quite often, what is really undermining a teacher's authority is not so much the kind of naughty, rebellious student, because that's kind of in the nature of teenagers to do that, but it's being undermined by your colleagues. The lack of support from senior leadership. I've sat in a school meeting where the emphasis has been, right, we're cracking down on uniform, any kind of disobeying the uniform rules, you've got to send the pupil home. So I've done that only to have the pupil come in 5 minutes later with a note from a senior leader saying, I'm excused. Those kind of low-level things that happen every day that teachers have to manage kind of on their own make them much more difficult for them to exert the authority that schools need.
It's like the old broken windows fallacy of New York policing, but within schools, the idea if you allow graffiti and broken windows and low-level crime, then people go up to do higher-level crime. The same sense of if you allow this sort of small rule-breaking and sort of carefree attitude, then children as a whole become harder to manage. But I want to bring this back to the issue of non-crime hate incidents being logged by the police, of course against children, which is bizarre, but adults as well. Why do the police do this when the title of these explains that they're not crimes? Why are the police involved in things that aren't crimes?
I think there are several complex reasons for that, but I think, as you say, they are not actually crimes, so they have a lower lower bar of evidential proof required. So in a way, they become easier things for the police to deal with, I expect, is one thing. Secondly, you can't exclude the fact that the possible effects of, the massive rollout of EDI policies, equity, diversity and inclusion policies in institutions like the police that encourage them to see microaggressions as more important than actual real aggressions, that are criminal. So I think that, and they're kind of, their job is to maintain order in society. And it's become like now we see order in society not as dealing with criminals, but with dealing with the way people behave, the way people speak to each other. It's interpersonal, much more intrusive and much more authoritarian. And doing this to school children is like entrenching, it's like encouraging them to accept this as a normal part of life in Britain today. And it really isn't and shouldn't be.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Alka, for joining us. Alka Siegel-Cuthbert there from Don't Divide Us. And, of course, it did used to be the case that families and communities were responsible for training children in good behaviour, not the police, who only got involved in serious issues. Well, we're joined now to continue discussing this by head teacher Christine Cunliffe. Christine, thank you for joining us. Do you recognise in what Alka said there something about the culture of modern education, that children are seen as perhaps psychologically fragile, that they're no longer expected to be robust when insulted by other children?
I totally agree. I do feel so sorry for these. I really do. It's not their job to be doing this. And it's such a grey area. It's schools' responsibility. And I'm taking on board what Alka said. You've got to lead from the top on this. These issues are not new. And schools should be able to deal with them. And if they're not being dealt with, then, the inspectorate should be in there and finding out why, because behaviour is a big part of inspections. So, and you've got to support your staff. If you set your stall out and say this is how children will behave in the school, you will be sorted. That has got to ring through. I do feel sorry for the police. This is in the responsibility of the school.
Now, of course, Christine, you're a head teacher of a school. I must ask, have you ever recommended a pupil for a non-crime hate incident?
No.
It's I would have thought that would be the answer that most teachers and most professionals in the country would give. But clearly there are some people who share your profession who take a very different point of view. Perhaps they don't work in schools that are as upstanding as yours. But do you see why some of your teaching colleagues might feel the need to to really get the police involved in what, from what we read in the papers, seems to be incredibly low-level playground insults.
I would have, reading the press today as well, and some of the names, and there's no excuse for name calling, there's no excuse for bullying or any of this type of behaviour. But these things were happening when I was at school in the 70s and the 80s. It's no different, and it's how you deal with it. I mean, it's to refer a child for this kind of thing, it has got to be a significant issue. If your behaviour policies are robust in school and you nurture and shape that development of young people, which is where it should be, in a safe space in school, then we won't have these problems moving forward.
Christine, one of the responsibilities that's changed for teachers over recent years is the responsibility to refer children to Prevent, which is the government scheme for trying to catch early people who might be interested in terrorist activity or might seem to be being groomed by extremism. Do you think that's got something to do with a kind of culture of over-reporting, the fact that now teachers feel that it's their absolute duty to flag any kind of behaviour very early on that might possibly turn into something more sinister?
I think with every child there's a pattern, it's a story, it's all the things that happen that might add up. And I think with Prevent in particular, it shouldn't be taken lightly, but it could be that there are some serious concerns. It might have been flagged through sort of e-filtering, it might be through certain behaviours that are not trivial or minor issues, but maybe building a picture where you might think that that child is in danger of behaviours in the future, and at the end of the day it is to shape and nurture that behaviour and pulling your resources together and getting help maybe on a higher level what we can't deal with.
Of course, the criticism sometimes with Prevent is that people can tiptoe around those who might propose or even pose a very, very serious risk, and potentially teachers don't want to be called names or seen as discriminating. And so what we see with children who are referred to this programme is that most of them tend to be from the sort of subset of ideologies that don't tend to cause mass terrorism events. Does that chime with your view of teachers perhaps tiptoeing around the real issues and being trigger happy with these referrals for people that perhaps don't pose the biggest issues?
I think the alarm there was trigger happy. No one should be trigger happy with referring. It's got to be for a real and genuine need. And I think it's about teams pulling together in school with your safeguarding people to make sure that you'll make the right decision for the child. Because at the end of the day, these measures are in place to protect children. When it becomes against children, it's the wrong systems. It's got to be about supporting those young people. At the end of the day, they're children.
Absolutely.
That's some wise words to end on there. Thank you so much, Christine, head teacher of LVS Ascot. Really appreciate your time.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show, including why Rachel Reeves is not satisfied with the economy.
We'll bring you more from our...
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
Young adults spend a few years living away from home at university, those who go to university, but many then have no choice but to move back in with their parents because of the rising cost of renting.
But is this an excuse, and are Gen Z or Z just being lazy?
No, I mean, what do you make of it, Debbie? Because we do have to have some sympathy, don't we, in that, rents are very high, it's very hard to get a mortgage. There are issues there.
I think the push towards young people to go to university as well is not necessarily the right thing for a lot of people. And I think people should start work early. These guys leave their universities with a huge amount of debt, no jobs, or huge rent. You know what I mean? It's just ridiculous. So I think we've got to look at the work ethic and start it younger. Because I think it's so easy just to move back with your mum and dad, isn't it?
To speak like a Gen Zer, they would say that, well, it's OK for your generation, you had it easy.
Realistically, that isn't quite that true, because a lot of people then didn't go to university. This is a relatively new thing that everybody goes to university.
I have to say, what strikes me today is that you still have, amongst all these problems, not having enough money, going to university when perhaps you shouldn't be, all these sort of issues, you still get all these people saying, well, I'm going to have a year out.
Yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think the thing is, they say, oh, it was easy for you, but it wasn't really. We still had to rent places.
But the thing is with this debate, Debbie, is the generation we're talking about, Gen Z, who were accused of being lazy, have been raised by our generation.
Yeah.
So what have we done wrong that, if they are lazier, has made them like that?
GB News, the People's Channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. From pop stars to politicians, I'll interview anybody in a pub who's got a political opinion. Join me every Friday on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube or gbnews.com, or wherever you get your podcasts. This is GB News, the People's Channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akweer, for an informative, interactive news programme with a difference. It's fun.
No, he didn't say that, Dave.
I'm so surprised.
I think there's an element of truth to that.
Join me from 3 p.m. every weekend, only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 1:23 p.m. on the 15th of November, and the British economy has been stagnating in the first 3 months of this new Labour government. This comes despite Labour's mission to deliver the highest sustained growth in the G7.
Well, earlier we spoke to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, about this disappointing growth performance. Here's what she had to say.
Chancellor, this government has said over and over again that you are all about growth, but the figures out today, pretty anemic. The projections from the OBR following the budget, not great either. When are we going to see real growth, and when is that going to feed through into people starting to feel a bit better off?
Growth is the #1 mission of this government, and after 14 years of stagnation, it can't come too soon. Obviously, I want the growth numbers to be stronger than those published today, which is why in the first week in office, I announced a comprehensive set of planning reforms and the creation of a national wealth fund. It's why in the budget I committed to £20 billion of support for R&D and investment in infrastructure. And it's why in the Mansion House speech last night, I announced a comprehensive set of plans for our pensions industry to unlock long-term patient capital to help small businesses and staff grow, and also to invest in infrastructure.
You mentioned wanting a closer relationship with the European Union in that speech, something that the Governor of the Bank of England talked about as well, in that it had hampered growth, Brexit had hampered growth. How's that going to work? And can you reassure GB News viewers, many of whom voted for Brexit, that Brexit is safe with this government?
However you voted in the referendum, it's undeniable that it is harder for businesses today to trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners in the European Union. It doesn't mean that we should go back into the EU or the single market or customs union, but we do need a reset of that relationship, because it's in our British national interest to improve trade flows and make it easier for great British businesses to sell into European markets. And that's why next month I'll be attending the Eurogroup finance ministers meeting to make that case in Brussels for free and open trade.
Really interesting to learn there that the Chancellor will be attending the EU finance ministers meeting in Brussels, despite the UK not being a member of the European Union.
Indeed, and suggesting there that should be a reset of the trading relationship with the EU. Very interesting. She didn't directly answer the question about whether Brexit was safe under the Labour government. And, of course, the new American government may change British trading relationships as well.
Well, there's a choice to be made, isn't there? Do we lock ourselves within sort of the EU rules and regulations? Do we lock ourselves in lockstep to what the EU legislate to be their standards for food, or for those silly little drinks bottle caps and all the rest of it? I mean, do we really follow all of these rules and continue to do so? Or do we say there's a big wide world out there and we don't want to lock ourselves to this one block and perhaps we want to do good trade deals with other countries around the world? I mean, it's a choice.
It is, and it is certainly true, though, the Chancellor is right, that for some small traders it has just become a lot more difficult to export. And obviously we really do need to increase our exports in this country. We have a really terrible negative balance of trade where we buy far more things in than we sell, which makes our economy very fragile. So we should make trading easier if possible. But that's not necessarily the same thing, as you say, as being much closer to the EU.
Well, exactly. I mean, there is the question of what do we allow to be sold in this country? And frankly, it will always be more difficult to sell into the EU as long as any one food and drinks regulation is different from that within the EU, because then they'll insist on all of these checks and all the rest of it. But it's a question, do we want to set our own rules or do we want to follow European rules? And ideally, what we would achieve is, of course, mutual recognition, whereby we say, you know what, we're happy with your food safety, and they say we're happy with your food safety, and then everyone gets along and everyone's friends. But if the EU is unwilling to say that we trust your regulators, we trust your standards, you're a developed, wealthy country, we will accept your standards, why should we do that unilaterally to them if they're not going to do that for us?
Yeah, and pragmatically, looking at countries like France and Germany and Italy, they're very similar countries to us in terms of their food safety. I mean, you wouldn't think twice about eating food that you buy in France or Germany or Italy, and it's ridiculous to think that we need different...
I'd also say that I don't think twice about going to a restaurant in New York.
No, it's your own risk.
I don't think twice about, you know, buying fast food in Virginia. I mean, I don't know why we sort of have this bogeyman status of developed countries' food standards. In Australia, they have marvellous beef, brilliant beef, that is illegal under EU law. I mean, why? When we go on holiday to Australia, do we refuse to eat the beef? No, of course we eat the beef.
But it isn't just about the standards. I mean, that is one aspect of the regulations. But certainly when I was an MP, what constituents were telling me, it wasn't to do with the standards, it's to do with the bureaucracy of actually trading. Because now that we're not in the single market, all sorts of different forms have to be filled in. And
even
often,
if it's exactly the same food.
Exactly. It's not that you can't export it, it's just that there are now more processes. And if you're a small trader and you can't import in bulk or export in bulk, that has been a problem. Now, that's not to say that that's an argument against Brexit, but it's just the Chancellor is right. It has made life more difficult for some people.
But some big choices to be made there. And I should say that the Chancellor was asked about children being investigated over these non-crime hate incidents. Shall we have a listen to what she had to say?
You've talked about public services and reform of them, but story today about 9-year-old children be investigated by the police over comments they've made in the playground. Surely police should be investigating real crimes. Isn't that a ridiculous use of police resources?
I agree with you, and that's why we've committed to ensure that there are 13,000 neighbourhood police officers and community support officers in our local areas, ensuring that our town centres and our high streets are safe, and that people feel that they can go out in the evenings and feel safe in their local communities. That's the priority for Britain, and that's the priority of this Labour government.
So you don't think they should be investigating 9-year-olds' comments?
I don't think that is the best use of police time.
Oh, it took two asks of the question to actually get an answer there, but glad we did.
What I want to know is, why did the police start doing this? When was the change in regulation? It sounds like it was 10, 15 years ago. And have we really forgotten in this country what childhood is about? I mean, the whole point of childhood is to be able to practice making mistakes when the consequences aren't severe. So, you know, I've got children. I was a child once. I used to beat my brothers up. You know, we used to play fight and sometimes more than play fight. But my parents didn't call the police.
No.
That's the environment in which you learn not to hit. But the problem is, if you say something bad in school and you get reported to the police, how are you ever supposed to learn what are the limits of you know, good relationships and how not to offend people too much? It's extreme.
Yeah, and if you can't test those boundaries, you don't know where the boundaries are actually set.
Exactly.
It's also terrifying.
It is.
To involve the police.
Children need to grow up feeling free to, free to learn good behaviour, yes, but not under threat of severe punishment if they err.
And it's normal for people to tease each other in the playground. It's normal for rough and tumble play to happen. Children should climb trees. Children should break bones. We shouldn't be afraid of this sort of stuff. But my goodness me, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News, and there's plenty more to come. We're going to be sticking with the subject of Rachel Reeves, but for a different reason.
Yes, she's reportedly, that's the Chancellor, being caught changing her CV. We'll get to the bottom of that.
Miriam, thank you very much. The top stories this hour. The UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the third quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves says she's not satisfied with those figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investment in Britain.
Also responding to the figures, Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says they're extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
And just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier, people smugglers have launched more small boats from French beaches. GB News can reveal that multiple launches were attempted on a stretch of beach south of the French port of Boulogne this morning. A number of the launches were intercepted by French police and a suspected boat smuggler was arrested. But at least 2 small boats made it to UK waters, and those on board are being taken by a Border Force vessel to the migrant processing facility at Dover Harbour. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news from me in half an hour.
For the very latest GB News direct to your smartphone, sign up to News Alerts by scanning the QR code or go to gbnews.com/alerts.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another quiet day for many of us, with some bright spells, especially in the south, but a lot of cloud for many, and some outbreaks of rain in the northwest, but most especially the far northwest of Scotland, with this cold front approaching. Now, this cold front is going to introduce a significant change in the weather during the weekend and into early next week. But for the time being, we keep high pressure, we keep things relatively benign. There has been some fog and frost in the southwest first thing. That'll tend to lift. And then bright spells for the south, but areas of cloud floating about. The thickest cloud will be in the far north, where it's going to be raining and windy, feeling unpleasant as that rain moves in for northern and northwest Scotland. Drizzly for the southwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. But the heaviest rain will affect the northwest of Scotland as we end the afternoon and go into the evening. Gusty winds associated with this as well. Some clear spells there for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise a lot of cloud for the northern half of the UK. Nevertheless, we keep some clear spells going into the night time across the south, and because of that, once again, temperatures will fall away and some fog and frost patches will form. But the front that's bringing the heavy rain to northwest Scotland tends to sink south overnight into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and then eventually northern England by dawn. A relatively weak feature, but it is going to bring a spell of rain and gusty winds, and it's introducing much colder air to parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland for the start of Saturday. In fact, we'll see a mix of rain, sleet and hail showers at lower levels for northern Scotland and some snow over the hills. The wind's picking up strength as well, with gales for the far north of Scotland. Meanwhile, much lighter winds further south, with a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of mostly light rain moving south. Highs of 13 Celsius in the south.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Southbound M1, Sheffield to the M18, junction 33 to 32. Now, lane 1 of 4 is combed off. There's a breakdown there. There's a queue as well, a big queue from Wrexham up to Chester on the A483 this afternoon. Northbound side of the Wrexham Road is currently part blocked. That's from Belgrave up to the A55, up to junction 38 at the Post House roundabout. That's due to a collision. Clockwise M25 slow just past 18 at Chorleywood. That follows an earlier broken down car. All the lanes, though, are back open. Now, to Hythe in Kent, the Dynchurch Road is shut between Martello Drive and Aldi and Slow, an overturned vehicle there being dealt with. And to Agborough in Devon, the A3121, that's shut between Parsonage Lane and the Ivy Bridge turn off. An overturned lorry there means no way through and delays. That's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 38 minutes past 1, and I've got to say, a lot of you have been getting in touch about our top story of the day. That is non-crime hate incidents, particularly against children.
Indeed. And Grumpy Grandad points out that he feels sorry for today's kids because they're not allowed to be kids anymore. They get hammered with woke ideas they don't really understand. And when they get out of school, we keep them indoors to keep them safe from harm. And we wonder why they don't know how to behave in a real world. I think that's what it comes down to, that kids should be allowed to have a bit of rough and tumble, experiment with how to behave correctly without facing lifelong consequences.
Although a commenter calling themselves Political Mess does put the other side, saying, I agree with most comments about kids on here, but then I can't stop thinking of Jamie Bulger's killers and how their school behaviour must have shown some signs of the problems at an early age. Perhaps it's... I mean, we've got to point out there are some evil... There are a few, but there are some evil kids out there. There are some kids who might go on to be terrorists or murderers, and it is important to keep tabs on those people.
I don't think anyone's arguing that children... there shouldn't be an age of criminal responsibility, which at the moment is 10. From the age of 10, you can technically be arrested. I think it's what counts as a crime. And we were looking up in the break where the idea of the non-crime hate incidents came from, and actually it was the College of Policing that introduced it as guidance in 2014. So it's never come from an act of Parliament. No democratically elected government has ever decided to create these incidents. It's something that police have done themselves.
Yeah, and then it's just sort of grown and changed. But of course, when Suella Braverman was Home Secretary, she tried to pare back the scope of non-crime hate incidents. Was it 2022?
Yeah.
2022, there was legislation passed that meant the police could no longer... Well, it used to be the case that if someone lodged or complained about your speech, it would just be automatically logged as a non-crime hate incident.
And if they said that I've been discriminated against, that would be... That would be enough. Well, now at least there has to be some sort of process. But my goodness me, it seems the process is light touch. Definitely needs reform. Now, it's been reported that the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, has changed her CV on the website LinkedIn.
Yes, it's claimed that she changed her title from economist at the Bank of Scotland to retail banking at Halifax. Notice the time there, from December 2006 to December 2009. She used to claim she was an economist. Now that she works in retail banking. Well, let's have a look what this actually means, because the website behind that report is indeed Guido Fawkes, and Max Young is a reporter there. They were first to break this story. Max, what on earth is going on?
Well, I have to say it was incredibly bizarre and quite hilarious writing up this story, because the Chancellor changes her LinkedIn after essentially misrepresenting her career. I mean, it beggars belief, doesn't it? She said in her Mansion House speech last night that she worked as an economist at the Bank of England, and then she just said, and then in financial services afterwards. So I thought, well, that's funny, because we reported last month that she actually didn't work as an economist there at all, which she had claimed in her LinkedIn, as your viewers can see. But she was actually running with two other people a small administrative complaints department that also dealt with IT matters and that sort of thing. So very far from the economics team. And so I listened to the speech and I checked the LinkedIn again. I've been checking it sort of periodically, and gone is the economist title. Now it's just retail banking. They've actually gone in and changed it. I don't know if she has herself, perhaps one of her team has, probably. unless she's been doing some sort of late night updates to her online profile. And that is pretty extraordinary, really.
Max, we should make clear that she actually was an economist at the Bank of England. That is not in doubt. It's just what job, particular role she held at the bank. But just to take a slightly different point of view here, whatever her role was at that bank, is it not the case that politicians now are under so much scrutiny that even something as potentially innocuous as this, let's see how it plays out, is noticed by a website within hours of it changing, and it's become headline news? It's very difficult to see how people can come into politics now having something in their background that they might need to...
They could just be truthful on their CVs.
Well, you don't... Indeed, we don't know...
That's an interesting point, Miriam, and I know, as an ex-politician yourself, you've probably been under quite a lot of public scrutiny. I'd say it fills me with hope that the people who misrepresent themselves aren't allowed to get away with it, and that there are some who will be watching to see if this sort of stuff tries to get swept under the rug, which it has. There wasn't any public update that the LinkedIn was changed. So I think it's of course a good thing. I mean, we need to be truthful. If you don't want to be caught misrepresenting yourself, then just tell the full and complete truth in the first place, would be my advice to aspiring politicians who shouldn't be dissuaded by this. They should be buoyed.
But I suppose this gets to the point of the Chancellor, who has presided over a fairly controversial budget that raised taxes, that increased borrowing, that meant that mortgage rates are expected now to be higher than they otherwise would have been, and all the rest of it. It seems that she may well have been exaggerating her private sector experience.
This is, of course, the other thing to say, right, is that... it was previously the impression that for the entirety of the noughties she was working as an economist, whereas it now has been updated. She's clarified that for only half of the noughties she was working as an economist, so half of that experience is wiped out in one fell swoop. And she talks up her economic credentials the whole time. She always mentions her time at the Bank of England. She doesn't mention her time at HBOS too much. I think we now know why. So I think it probably does damage her credibility that approximately half of the time she hasn't been doing anything to do with economics at all.
Do you think, in terms of the timing, why it was changed now, do you think she's had a tip-off that somebody is looking in more detail at her past career? What would trigger this change?
Well, we did a story towards the end of October. I think it was about a week and a half before the budget on this, because she said, economists on her LinkedIn, we spoke to several sources who are familiar with Reeves during her time at HBOS, who helpfully clarified to us her actual position. And we accused her at the time of misrepresenting her CV on LinkedIn. And it looks like, well, my guess would be that someone in the Treasury team has waited a bit for it to die down, thought they could probably get away with changing it 3 weeks later, and that no one would notice, which has unfortunately not transpired in the end.
Well, Max Young, reporter at Guido Fawkes, appreciate your time on this story. Thanks for speaking to us. We should say that, of course, we've reached out to the Treasury, reached out to Rachel Reeves. She hasn't responded yet, but as and when we do get a response from the Treasury, we'll, of course, bring it to you.
Well, I'm going to make myself terribly unpopular and say that this kind of gotcha culture for politicians is exactly the same kind of culture that leads to reporting people every time they open their mouth and say something that other people don't like. Please have your say.
I don't know. I think if you're going to be in charge of all of the money, if you want to be the Chancellor, probably don't try and puff up your CV.
But that's true, Tom.
Be truthful.
But if you think about the people who come into politics, like, we want them to have had previous careers, to have been previously successful in other roles. Now, given the extent of everybody's digital footprint now, by the time you get to the age of 50, I don't know how old Rachel is, but get to the age of 50, how many millions of characters are there written about you that actually, in retrospect, you might think, that wasn't quite accurate, or maybe I'd change that in hindsight. Now, I'm not defending, if she's come out and lied and, we find that out, then I'm not defending that, of course. But the idea that there are now people who go through every single letter that someone's written in their past life to try and catch them out, how does that help democracy?
Well, I mean, she's had, what, 3 or 4 jobs, right? Since she graduated, went into this sort of private sector role, went to the Bank of England, did something else and then became a politician, right? It's not that many jobs to sort of be able to say accurately what you did. I think it's a very low bar to ask politicians to not puff up themselves too much. It's like the final interview round watching The Apprentice. And you always get sort of the friends of Sir Alan Sugar sitting across a desk, going through the CV of these contestants and asking them, you know, well, did you really do, or did you explain that incredibly truthfully?
But how
and if
many...
you want one of the top jobs in politics in the country, surely your audition process should be as rigorous as that of The Apprentice.
But how many people have written their CV or a job application to show themselves in the best light? Of course you shouldn't lie, but how many people have kind of spun it to make sure they had a little bit more responsibility than maybe they did? I'm not defending that. I'm saying this is normal human behaviour, and the fact that that should then disqualify you or cause you to be brought down like this, I think, who is going to go into politics if someone is going through your every single move online forever? Anyway, I think I'm going to be the unpopular one here, so Tom, so I won't be reading the Yosses.
This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Plenty more to come. Should the government U-turn on its plans to increase the bus fare cap? Yes, going up by 50% the amount that you can be charged for bus fares. We're going to discuss that next.
Sunday with Michael Portillo from 11, only on GB News.
Restaurant St. Bart's executive head chef Johnny Crowe creates ramen with a British twist, using only the finest UK-sourced produce. As the only restaurant in London to hold both a Michelin star and a green Michelin star, St. Bart's emphasises sustainability and the diversity of British ingredients. Johnny joins me now. Johnny, congratulations on having these 2 Michelins. How do you get a Michelin green star?
Probably a better question for the inspectors, but I mean, I think it's down to a lot of hard work.
What hoops do you have to go through?
So, I think it's working every day on it. The sustainability isn't something that you just achieve and then therefore you have it and you can sort of relax. It's about every day trying to be better, trying to make a restaurant and a business that is overly sustainable.
So what things do you do to make it sustainable?
So one of the main things that we've really tried to do is focusing on British produce, and actually, you know, part of that is about sustainability and food miles. A massive part of it for us was also about sort of helping the British economy and the farming economy and our fisheries as well. But yeah, no, the idea...
You have a lot of farms near St. Bart's, which is in the heart of the City of London.
Well, funnily enough, there's an amazing collective called Shrub Provisions, who we use a hell of a lot, who work with farmers all around East Sussex. So it makes a difference from flying it in from Kenya or somewhere else like that. But no, like a big part of it was, one, using British produce to cut down on food miles, but also helping sustain our farming industry.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome to State of the Nation, daily plunge into the stories shaping our country. I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and Monday to Thursday we bring you the insights, the facts, the truth about how our country is being governed. Because what happens in Downing Street matters down your street. Tune in to State of the Nation every Monday to Thursday, 8 to 9 o'clock. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently. It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it? It's explosive. I mean, this is very good. It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's just gone 10 to 2, and the leader of the Liberal Democrats, Sir Ed Davey, a titan of politics, is urging the government to U-turn on its planned increase to the bus fare cap.
Well, this comes after Chancellor Rachel Reeves has announced in the budget that the £2 cap on single fares that applies on most routes outside London will be replaced by a new £3 cap until the end of 2025.
They've increased the cap on bus fares from £2 to £3 during a cost of living crisis. People who are really struggling, who depend on the bus to go to work, to go to towns like Wantage, young people to go to their college, they're going to have to pay this extra money, and it's going to hit them hard. And when we're trying to get people into public transport, into buses, it's the wrong decision.
I'm just upset that Ed Davey wasn't driving the bus or jumping off the top of the bus or somehow having a water slide involving a bus. I mean, surely he could think of a better stunt than standing at a bus stop.
I think
but there's a serious point.
There is. And I think this is a difficult one because, on the one hand, buses are incredibly important. I've been on a bus this morning to Waterloo. I don't know how much it cost me because I used but on the other hand, should lots of people in this country, lots and lots of people don't use buses, particularly people who live in rural areas where there aren't any buses, should they be subsidising through their taxes people who do use buses?
Yeah, and I think that there is an interesting point here in that should there be one national policy on what a bus cap is? I mean, we didn't used to have... This was only brought in, I think, in the last 5 or 6 years.
Yes, it was the previous government a few years ago, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, shouldn't it be that different areas have different policies? I mean, for example, the Mayor of Greater Manchester has decided that he is going to, with his tax, subsidise buses there. Other mayors might make other decisions. I mean, should we really have one...
Fixing.
Should we have one price for the whole country? It doesn't quite make sense to me.
Yeah, and I grew up in Sheffield in the 1980s, and all buses were 5p wherever you went. But it bankrupted the council because... You know, it's too cheap. You couldn't afford to run buses for that amount of money.
And then you don't get any buses at all.
Yeah.
Or you get a massive hike up to pay back the debt. I mean, there will be different policies that work, but maybe all politicians are wrong here. Maybe Ed Davey is wrong for saying it should be £2 and Rachel Reeves is wrong for saying it should be £3. Maybe it should be lots of different prices in lots of different places.
I mean,
is that so wrong?
The problem is that you've got this system in London that's heavily subsidised. Like, it loses the taxpayer millions and millions of pounds a year, but it's very good. But everybody in all the other cities and other places in England thinks we want transport as good as London. Well, if you want transport as good as London, it's going to cost absolutely huge amounts of money. And so this is the kind of compromise in between.
But also, if you want transport as frequent as getting the tube in London, I mean, there's a reason why the tube is that frequent. There are 9 million people who live in this city. Whereas if you, for all the will in the world, if you're in a rural village in one of the shires, like there isn't the demand to justify that sort of frequency.
There's not the density and the cost efficiency,
Well, we're going to stop talking about transport. We're going to get back to non-crime hate incidents. Yes, much more to come on the show. Don't go anywhere. But first, here's the weather.
There will be a light breeze in the morning, leading to a warm front. Boxed heat pumps, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another quiet day for many of us, with some bright spells, especially in the south, but a lot of cloud for many, and some outbreaks of rain in the northwest, but most especially the far northwest of Scotland, with this cold front approaching. Now, this cold front is going to introduce a significant change in the weather during the weekend and into early next week. But for the time being, we keep high pressure, we keep things relatively benign. There has been some fog and frost in the southwest first thing. That'll tend to lift. And then bright spells for the south, but areas of cloud floating about. The thickest cloud will be in the far north, where it's going to be raining and windy, feeling unpleasant as that rain moves in for northern and northwest Scotland. Drizzly for the southwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. But the heaviest rain will affect the northwest of Scotland as we end the afternoon and go into the evening. Gusty winds associated with this as well. Some clear spells there for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise a lot of cloud for the northern half of the UK. Nevertheless, we keep some clear spells going into the night time across the south, and because of that, once again, temperatures will fall away and some fog and frost patches will form. But the front that's bringing the heavy rain to northwest Scotland tends to sink south overnight into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and then eventually northern England by dawn. A relatively weak feature, but it is going to bring a spell of rain and gusty winds, and it's introducing much colder air to parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland for the start of Saturday. In fact, we'll see a mix of rain, sleet and hail showers at lower levels for northern Scotland and some snow over the hills. The wind's picking up strength as well, with gales for the far north of Scotland. Meanwhile, much lighter winds further south, with a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of mostly light rain moving south. Highs of 13 Celsius in the south.
We can expect clear skies, leading to a light and warm day ahead. Lovely. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
This is the final week to grab your chance to win Christmas on Us this year. There's £20,025 in tax-free cash. There's £5,000 to spend on gifts for all the family. There's £500 to spend in your favourite supermarket. And a festively themed GB News goodie bag. We'll get it all to you in time for the big day. For another chance to win, call 0903 681 3232. Calls cost £2 plus your network access charge. Text cash to 63232. One entry costs £2 plus one standard network rate message, or text bonus to 63232. 5 entries cost £5 plus one standard network rate message. You can enter online at gbnews.com/win. Entries start from just £2, or post your name and number to GB09 PO Box 8690 Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 6 p.m. on the 22nd of November. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the arguments. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, for a frank and honest discussion with those in power that cuts through the spin and gets to the heart of the issues shaping our nation.
You haven't confirmed that you want to stand as leader, but you haven't ruled it out either.
This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? I deliver the dose of reality Westminster needs. That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here we do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there short and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Why go out on a Friday night when Friday night comes straight to your home?
Talking about?
Join me and my A-team of top pundits.
Chemistry tonight is electric.
As we tackle the big stories of the day with wit, insight and fearless energy.
Man of the people.
It's all vibe.
Just a filing cabinet on wheels with a tie on.
So, order in Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, every Friday at 8, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2 o'clock on Friday, the 15th of November. I'm Tom Harwood.
And I'm Miriam Cates. Now, policing the tweets, not the streets. Children as young as 9 are among those being probed by the police over non-crime hate incidents like insults in the playground and social media posts. What is going on?
Economic growth stalls. The British economy barely grew between July and September. The Chancellor says she's not satisfied.
We're 4 months into this government. There's a lot more to do to turn around the growth performance of the last decade or so.
And a migrant healthcare row. A council in Altrincham is under fire after it was revealed that illegal migrants in the area will be getting access to private healthcare. We'll speak to a local councillor about that.
And farmers' fury. Farmers across the country are gearing up to protest the government's family farm tax raid. We'll hear from farmers in Lancashire.
And a blockbuster boxing bout. Mike Tyson takes on YouTuber Jake Paul tomorrow. Will it be the fight of the century or a celebrity circus?
Now, this non-crime hate incident story continues to grow. First, it was Alison Pearson, the Telegraph columnist. Next, it was 8-year-old children for playground insults. And now, it's doctors and vicars.
It seems to be now that the police think that a crime is hurting someone else's feelings or expressing a point of view that not everybody else shares, which of course is not what the police are there for at all. But I think somebody from the Free Speech Union told us that there have been 250,000 of these recorded incidents in the last 10 years, and I think 13,000 in the last year alone. So clearly a growing issue.
A growing issue, one that was meant to be clamped down upon. If there have been 13,000 in the last year alone. When Suella Braverman was Home Secretary, she tried to tighten up the system, meaning that every report had to be investigated before a non-crime hate incident was lodged against someone's file. Of course, before, it was just automatically whacked there with no means of recourse. But despite that, there are still 13,000. And Miriam, we were reading in the break that, I mean, this includes now vicars and doctors. I mean,
social workers.
There are going to be lots of things that various vicars say that I disagree with. That doesn't mean that I think that the police should investigate.
The basis of free speech, the basis of living in a liberal democracy is that you can say what you want. And we do have laws that prevent actual physical harm, or at least punish actual physical harm. But the idea is that you can say what you want, and that the natural dynamics of human relations, I'm not going to insult you right now because you're sitting next to me, and also because I like you very much, Tom, obviously. But, this is how human relationships work, and people's feelings are hurt sometimes, but often it makes you more robust rather than feeling that you've got to call the police.
Absolutely, and there are plenty of books published that might offend people. There are plenty of historical works of fiction or literature, art or religious books. I mean,
some people find offensive.
Sitting out and reading Leviticus here would probably put me in prison.
Well, I think it would not do very good for our viewing figures.
Perhaps not.
But it is a serious point. And also, people complain all the time that burglaries aren't being solved, very few sexual assaults come to court. But if the police have recorded 250,000 of these incidents, that's a lot of manpower, isn't it, to investigate that, manpower that's not being spent on what people would consider to be actual crimes.
Well, we'll try and get to the bottom of it. And, of course, we want your views and comments while we do so. gbnews.com/your say is the site to visit. But that's all to come, of course, after your latest news headlines.
Good afternoon. The top stories this hour. The UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the third quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves said she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns to savers, but crucially to free up investment, to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investments in Britain.
Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says the figures are extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
Rachel Reeves says she plans to create pension mega funds that will power growth in the economy and reward British savers. In her first Mansion House speech as Chancellor, Ms Reeves announced plans for the mega funds, which she said could bring in £80 billion to invest in businesses and infrastructure. She addressed issues of financial instability and promised to make economic growth Labour's central mission in the coming years. These mega funds will mirror the schemes in Australia and Canada, where pension funds take advantage of size to invest in assets that have higher growth potential. Sir Ed Davey has visited high street businesses, calling for a government U-turn on the rise of the bus fare cap. The party leader had been due to take a lesson at the depot in Oxfordshire today and hear concerns from bus company representatives about the £1 hike in the threshold. But instead, he met people at shops in Wantage as the party highlights research suggesting some may avoid travelling to their local high street due to expected fare rises. The £2 cap on single fares that applies on most routes outside London will be replaced by a new £3 cap until the end of next year, announced by Chancellor Rachel Reeves in her budget. The Liberal Democrats have called on the government to reverse the move.
They've increased the cap on bus fares from £2 to £3 during a cost of living crisis. People who are really struggling, who depend on the bus to go to work, to go to towns like Wantage, young people to go to their college, they're going to have to pay this extra money, and it's going to hit them hard. And when we're trying to get people into public transport, into buses, it's the wrong decision.
Elsewhere, just a day after the Prime Minister announced the significant arrest of a suspected migrant boat supplier, people smugglers have launched more small boats from French beaches. GB News can reveal that multiple launches were attempted on a stretch of beach south of the French port of Boulogne this morning. A number of the launches were intercepted by French police, and a suspected boat smuggler was arrested. But at least 2 small boats made it to UK waters, and those on board are being taken by a Border Force vessel to the migrant processing facility at Dover Harbour. The Duke of Sussex is one of 2 claimants whose claims are still live against the publisher of The Sun over allegations of unlawful information gathering, his barrister has told the High Court. A hearing today heard that Harry and former Labour deputy leader Tom Watson are now the only people continuing their claims against News Group newspapers after several others settled their cases. The 2 remaining cases are expected to go to trial in January, with Harry alleging he was targeted by journalists and private investigators working for NGN, which also published the now-defunct News of the World. The publishers previously denied unlawful activity took place at The Sun. And in sport, boxing champion Mike Tyson slapped former YouTuber Jake Paul at a charged weigh-in for tonight's controversial heavyweight fight in Texas. Now, after both men had weighed in, Jake Paul crawled across the floor before rising up to Tyson's eye line for the traditional final head-to-head. That's when 58-year-old Tyson then slapped his opponent across the face, prompting security and team members to rush in to separate them. Paul, however, seemed unfazed. Instead, he blew kisses at the former champion. And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More from me in half an hour.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 9 minutes past 2 on the 15th of November. And police the streets, not the tweets. That's the message that the Prime Minister, following a rise in police investigations into non-crime hate incidents. But is this really a good use of police time?
Well, a burglary victim has criticised Essex police for not properly investigating her case, instead choosing to investigate Telegraph columnist Alison Pearson. She says, "We're a police state now, policing people's ideologies rather than holding criminals to account." Is this particular victim right?
Well, we are joined now by that burglary victim, Izzy Pinchin, who's joining us live. Izzy, thank you so much for coming on the show. Can you tell our viewers what happened to you?
My aunt and uncle were just out for 45 minutes in the afternoon for a dog walk, and in that time were broken into by someone that had been watching the house.
No, it's a terrible experience for anyone to suffer that kind of burglary, but how do you feel that the police sort of responded to it, helped you along? Did you feel particularly supported?
I think there's a huge lack of support for people that are going through serious crimes like that. I think to have no resolution or not even the suspects identified is quite just sad, really. There's no accountability for them.
I think the difficulty here that our viewers are seeing is that on the one hand, police don't seem to be taking real crime seriously enough, the crimes that you've experienced, crimes that really impact people's lives, and are a clear breach of the law in this country, any other country. But on the other hand, they seem to be falling over themselves to police speech, to police tweets. They hung on to this complaint against Alison Pearson for a year before even speaking to her about it. Is that the sense that you get, that it's just a misallocation of resources?
100%. It doesn't seem like it's being run at all. We actually had a second burglary last year, and the police mislaid the invoices, the damages, and it took multiple emails just to even get a response from them. So it's definitely inefficient use of public money.
They're losing track of crucial documents relating to real crime, and yet they're able to track the tweets of columnists and journalists and vicars and doctors and even 8-year-old school children as part of their priority list. I mean, do you think that this is a problem unique to Essex Police, or is this something the whole country is seeing?
I think it's across the country. My experiences with the two burglaries, both the Met and with Essex, there's similar stories of lack of empathy, not following through, no one being brought to justice, no accountability. So it's definitely affecting, I think, the entire country. And the fact that now you get in more trouble for posting something on X rather than if I broke into someone's house, I think is just absurd.
Of course, it's very important for people to be able to have confidence in the police. It is the police that stand between an ordered society and a very chaotic, disordered society. Do you think this kind of thing destroys people's confidence in the police, or do you think most people think this is just a kind of maybe a moral panic over something that the police have, it's up to them how they follow guidance?
I think you're left with a feeling of just getting on with it yourself. I mean, obviously, for serious crime, you should always phone the police. But there's definitely just a feeling of actually maybe you're just kind of better off sorting it out yourself, repairing what's been damaged or taken, because it doesn't seem like they take care, really.
No, I think a lot of people can relate to this sense of almost, I mean, I had my phone stolen a couple of years ago. I felt like I was almost doing a ritualistic duty, a sort of patriotic duty to log the incident. I knew nothing would be done. I knew I wouldn't get my phone back. No one would be caught. But I felt like I had a duty to add my number to the insane number of statistics out there. There is that sort of lack of support, trust, and I guess that sense that we've got a functional social contract when so many crimes that are perhaps classed as low level or too difficult to police or to prosecute are simply forgotten.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that also the amount of time that it takes when they have followed through, the amount of time it takes for then the justice system to bring charges and actually deal with the suspect, I think just adds to the lack of trust in the system.
Given that this does seem quite widespread, this concentration on so-called hate crimes rather than actual crimes, do you think actually there's a role for the government now to potentially change the law or issue statutory guidance to the police about how they should be using their time?
Well, they've already done that, giving guidance is in the public's interest to follow through with your investigations. But actually, that doesn't seem to have really done much good. And I think the government definitely has to step in to have a better police force so the public actually can put their trust back in the people that are meant to protect us.
OK, well, Izzy Pynchon, thank you so much for joining us, of course, and huge, well, just sending all the support to you in the world after not one, but two burglaries. Really, really awful situation there.
Well, it's important to know that Essex Police have issued a statement. They said our officers carried out house-to-house inquiries, sought CCTV from the area and any neighbouring properties. A forensics officer visited the property to collect evidence in a bid to identify the suspect or suspects in this investigation. After all lines of inquiry were exhausted, was the decision taken to file this investigation.
Well, there we go. We're going to move on now from law and order to the pound in your pocket, because the British economy has stagnated in the first 3 months of this new government, despite the Labour Party's campaigning mission to deliver the highest sustained growth in the G7.
Well, earlier we spoke to the Chancellor, Rachel Reeves, and here's what she had to say.
Chancellor, this government has said over and over again that you are all about growth, but the figures out today, pretty anemic. The projections from the OBR following the budget, not great either. When are we going to see real growth, and when is that going to feed through into people starting to feel a bit better off?
Growth is the #1 mission of this government, and after 14 years of stagnation, it can't come too soon. Obviously, I want the growth numbers to be stronger than those published today, which is why in the first week in office, I announced a comprehensive set of planning reforms and the creation of a national wealth fund. It's why in the budget I committed to £20 billion of support for R&D and investment in infrastructure. And it's why in the Mansion House speech last night, I announced a comprehensive set of plans for our pensions industry to unlock long-term patient capital, to help small businesses and startups, and also to invest in infrastructure.
You mentioned wanting a closer relationship with the European Union in that speech, something that the Governor of the Bank of England talked about as well, in that it had hampered growth, Brexit had hampered growth. How's that going to work? And can you reassure GBNews viewers, many of whom voted for Brexit, that Brexit is safe with this government?
However you voted in the referendum, it's undeniable that it is harder for businesses today to trade with our nearest neighbours and trading partners in the European Union. It doesn't mean that we should go back into the EU or the single market or customs union, but we do a reset of that relationship because it's in our British national interest to improve trade flows and make it easier for great British businesses to sell into European markets. And that's why next month I'll be attending the Eurogroup Finance Ministers meeting to make that case in Brussels for free and open trade.
Well, there we go. That was the Chancellor speaking some moments ago. Delighted to be joined now by Catherine Forster, our political correspondent who conducted that interview, of course. Catherine, what did you make of what Rachel Reeves had to say?
Yes, good afternoon, Tom and Miriam from Oxfordshire, where Ed Davey's been here talking about buses, and I interviewed the Chancellor a little bit earlier. Well, we heard so much about growth, didn't we, before the election and still. And before the election, we heard that the money for public services was going to come from growth, that there wouldn't be tax rises beyond those that had already been outlined. The reality has been rather different, hasn't it, with that budget that raised £40 billion in tax. Now, the Chancellor has admitted these growth figures are not good, 0.1%. Pretty flat. She's outlined a whole load of measures which she says are going to bring growth, but it's not going to come anytime soon, is it? And clearly now there's the added complication of an incoming Donald Trump administration in the United States. We don't know what that will mean, but it could mean tariffs, which could have a devastating effect on the global economy and our economy too. If it happens, it may be that we can do some sort of trade deal with the United States. We know that Trump has a soft spot for the United Kingdom. That was talked about previously. And Rachel Reeves, talking about that, said that in the last Trump presidency, Britain's trade with the US actually went up, and that she's confident that that can happen again. But I think the UK is going to be in a very difficult position, because if it moves closer to the European Union, as Labour have said that they want to do, that will make it more difficult to then cozy up to the United States and vice versa. So Rachel Reeves wanting to sound confident, wanting to sound like they can have their cake and eat it, both with the European Union and with the United States. I think the reality will be rather different, perhaps.
Catherine, Rachel Reeves has obviously talked a lot about growth, as we all know, but the message from the budget was an entirely different one, taxing businesses more, taxing work more, public spending going up, which means debt goes up, which means interest goes up, which means taxes may well go up again. How can the government tally its rhetoric about growth with the actual economic decisions it's made, which seem to be sending the UK in the other direction?
Well, they say, of course, that it's all the fault of the Conservatives. That's their view. But certainly businesses that they really did woo to a huge extent before the election, many of those very disappointed, very worried about what that increase in national insurance will do. Also, the workers' rights packages, and feeling that this government is by no means as pro-business as they were hoping or expecting. Also on farmers, I asked the Chancellor about food security, because this government talks a lot about energy security and the green agenda. Well, what about food security? We've heard that, you know, as a result of this inheritance tax rise on farmers are saying, well, food prices might go up. But she is holding firm. She's saying that she says this is a fair deal for farmers. She said that if there's a couple, if there's a farmhouse involved, that they can pass on £3 million free of inheritance tax. They said after that, inheritance tax charged at 20% as opposed to 40% to everybody else, that it's payable over 10 years and that it's interest-free. So I don't think the government is going to be budging on farmers at all. Just worth saying too that I also asked her about the 9-year-old that police had apparently investigated over comments that they'd made in the playground. I said, wasn't this crazy? And she said she agreed. She did not think it was a good use of police time at all.
Yes, Catherine, thank you for asking that one. I noticed you had to ask it twice to finally get that answer, but we got there. Catherine Forster, our intrepid political correspondent, thanks very much for joining us.
Now, of course, governments are always interested in the GDP figures, but GDP per capita, which of course is the amount of money that we have per person, hasn't really changed much over the last few years. And if you think about how much inflation has gone up, actually the amount of money people feel that they have in their pockets has gone down. That's going to be very difficult for the government to do anything about that. With taxes going up.
Yeah, those figures today, Q3 of this year, 0.1% growth, down from 0.5 the previous quarter. But of course, per person, per capita, that's actually a fall in GDP.
And that's what really matters to people at home, isn't it?
Plenty more to come, of course, in GB News. Catherine Forster mentioned it there, that farmers across the country are gearing up to protest against the government's family farm tax. Well, we're going to hear from some of those farmers next.
GB News Breakfast, every day from 6 a.m.
But it turns out there's a growing number of grandparents who are now taking up the hobby.
And not all of them are male. 7 million gamers are aged over 50, 7 million of them. And we're going to introduce you to one this morning. Her name's Kath Bowie. She's 76 years of age, and Kath has become a worldwide star of the game Fortnite. Good to see you, Kath.
Hello, good morning to both of you.
Morning. And tell me this, Kath, is Bowie your real name?
Bowie. Yeah.
Bowie.
Yeah, it is my real name, yes.
And you do it a Bowie and not a Bowie?
It's a Bowie, yes, definitely Bowie, yes.
Bowie or Bowie?
Bowie.
Bowie.
But that's not what the Jim Bowie was called, or Jim Bowie was called in the Alamo. He was a Bowie.
No, but that's what I'm called, Kath Bowie.
Oh,
She's their own superstar.
You are your own superstar. You are indeed. Well, so we're led to believe, Kath, that there's nobody else like you, or very few people like you, but there is. There is lots of people your age, your stage, doing what you do.
Yes, there's not a lot that streams. Okay, Fortnite, but there's definitely plenty that plays. Any game, you know what I mean? It doesn't have to be Fortnite. It can be any game.
So Kath, how did you get started in all of this?
Oh yeah, well it's 7 years ago actually. I walked into my teenage grandson's bedroom and just saw him playing what I now know, of course, what I play is Fortnite. And that was the very first week that Epic had released it. And it was just really love at first sight.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Every Saturday, 10 till 12, we'll bring you all of the news that you need to know. We'll also remind you that there is so much to smile about.
It's my favourite time of the week. I get to relax, enjoy some light-hearted stories, and let Ellie teach me about fashion too.
That's Saturday Morning Live, every Saturday, 10 till 12.
Only on GB News, Britain's news channel.
If you want your news to be straight talking,
this is a nightmare for the Conservatives again.
Down to earth,
it's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it?
And most importantly, honest.
Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them.
Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Nightmare commute? Kick it up a gear with GB News Radio. You can listen online and on DAB+ and on the GB News app. We're also on TuneIn and the Radio Player apps. From the school run to rush hour, get revved up with GB News Radio. We are the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 2:26 p.m. on the 15th of November. Now, farmers up and down the country are gearing up to protest against the government's inheritance tax raid on the agricultural sector next week.
And indeed, joining us from a farm is GB News reporter Jack Carson, live in Lancashire. Jack, take it away.
Thank you very much. Well, we've been on this farm since 6 a.m. this morning. We were up early feeding the cows, but that was only when we got here. The farmer had already been up since 1 a.m. You know, these people work day and night, early hours of the morning to keep their farms going and ultimately provide that food security for the UK. Now, the father of the farm, I guess you would say, Carl Kempson, joins me now. I mean, this is a mixed livestock farm, so there are so many components to keeping this place running, aren't there?
Yes, definitely. You know, it just depends whether it's what they're doing in the background, where they're mucking cows out, bedding cows down, to what they've been doing is just droving yard, fetching silage down to feed them ready for the night's bed down. And that's what they'll do, and every day that is the routine every day.
I mean, how worried are you about this inheritance tax change, about the future of this place? You know, maybe when you go passing it on to your sons and grandsons, how worried are you if there's no reversal to this?
Well, the nice thing would be the reversal, but if it stops as it is, I am very worried. We're going to have to make big changes from now till I pass to be able to secure their future. And my
it's about planning now. You've got to think so far ahead.
Yeah, definitely, 100%. We've got to start planning now for my son's futures and my grandson's future. Things have got to be planned all the way through, and how we do it is, like you said, the accountant this morning were here. He was and he will tell us the best way through at the end of the day to be able to let these lads continue farming at the basis as they are now, and at the capacity we will have to grow as years go on and on. If we grow, we to buy more land. If we buy more land, then it won't have to be in my threshold, it'll have to be in their threshold. So we're going to have to just plan for the future all the way through.
Also joining us is Jake Berry, of course, former MP in this area. I mean, Kemi Badenoch has said today that you know, if the Conservatives were to be back in power, they would reverse this cut. Should Keir Starmer follow suit?
All I can say is thank goodness for Kemi, and I think to some extent GB News and the campaigning that people are doing up and down the country. Good for her. She said she is going to reverse this, but that's 5 years away, and lots of family farms will be lost to this country. The loss of our food security, the loss of our family farms like this, if the Keir Starmer and the Labour Party doesn't act now. Look, it's not too late. There are ways we can do this which isn't going to shut down family farms in this country. Because as I've said throughout the day, and as we've met farmers and people working in the agricultural industry, this is one of Britain's vital pieces of infrastructure. It is a national industry, and it's unbelievable that we have a government that in one budget has pulled the rug on all of our family farms.
But also at the same time, the Conservatives have been in power for the last 14 years. The situation that farmers are in and facing across the country, do you understand that a lot of people are pointing the finger as well at the Conservatives to take some blame for the situation maybe that farmers are in?
Well, understand that's what political opponents say, but no, I just don't accept it. The government can always find money when it wants to do something, whether it's giving 20% pay rises to train drivers who are all already earning 70 grand a year, or doctors or people working on NHS. In terms of government spending, this change raises a tiny, tiny amount of money over 10 years. Forget, it's not going to arrive tomorrow, but the impact on agriculture, on our local farming community, will be irreversible. If a farmer has to sell part of his farm to pay an inheritance tax bill, that is the end of that farm. It's no longer financially viable. It will never come back. And that is why this is so important. That's why we're going to continue with this campaign.
Jake, Carl, thank you so much. I mean, the government say they're not going to change their minds at the moment. Rachel Reeves and the Treasury are saying that they've tried to do this in a fair and balanced way. But of course, you can hear there are many concerns up here on this farm in Lancashire about the future ahead.
Well, Jack Carson, thank you very much for bringing those perspectives, vital perspectives, here on GB News. Appreciate your time.
Well, this is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up for you on today's show. A council in Altrincham is under fire after it was revealed illegal migrants in the area will be getting access to private healthcare. We'll be speaking to a local councillor.
Good afternoon. The top stories from the GB newsroom. We start this bulletin with some breaking news that 4 teenagers and a 45-year-old man have been convicted at Bristol Crown Court of murdering 15-year-old Mason Rist and 16-year-old Max Dixon, who were attacked with machetes in a case of mistaken identity. 18-year-old Riley Tolliver, a 16-year-old boy, a 17-year-old boy and a getaway driver, 45-year-old Anthony Stook, were found guilty of the murders of Mason and Max by a jury of 9 men and 3 women at Bristol Crown Court after a 6-week trial. A 15-year-old boy was also found guilty of the murder of Max after previously pleading guilty to the murder of Mason. More on this breaking story as we get it. Elsewhere, the UK's economy barely grew between July and September, with uncertainty about the budget being blamed for the weak growth. It was expected to meet the same 0.2% growth figures reported in Germany and Japan, but instead the economy grew by 0.1%. The GDP figures have pushed the UK towards the bottom of the G7 growth table for the third quarter of the year. Chancellor Rachel Reeves says she's not satisfied with the figures.
Of course, I'm not content with the GDP numbers that we've seen today. If everything was fine, we wouldn't be taking the measures that we are to try and unlock the growth that I know exists in the economy but hasn't really been felt, either in living standards or in the competitiveness of our economy these last few years. That's why in my Mansion House speech last night, I set out a number of measures to unlock long-term patient capital from our pension funds to get better returns for savers, but crucially to free up investment, to invest in start-up and scale-up businesses and in the opportunities for infrastructure investments in Britain.
Shadow Chancellor Mel Stride says the figures are extremely disappointing.
Further evidence that I'm afraid this government has no plan for growth. I mean, in fact, in the budget, as we know, national insurance on employers rocketing up, which is going to be inflationary, depress wages and lead to higher unemployment. So I'm afraid, you know, even if you look at the forecasts that the OBR produced at the time of the budget, that shows lower growth across the forecast than they were forecasting when we were in office back in the spring. So great to talk about growth, but there's a difference between talking about it and actually delivering it.
And those are the latest GB News headlines for now. I'm Tatiana Sanchez. More news in half an hour.
Hi there and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. Another quiet day for many of us, with some bright spells, especially in the south, but a lot of cloud for many, and some outbreaks of rain in the northwest, but most especially the far northwest of Scotland, with this cold front approaching. Now, this cold front is going to introduce a significant change in the weather during the weekend and into early next week. But for the time being, we keep high pressure, we keep things relatively benign. There has been some fog and frost in the southwest first thing. That'll tend to lift. And then bright spells for the south, but areas of cloud floating about. The thickest cloud will be in the far north, where it's going to be raining and windy for feeling unpleasant as that rain moves in for northern and northwest Scotland. Drizzly for the southwest of Scotland, Northern Ireland and northwest England. But the heaviest rain will affect the northwest of Scotland as we end the afternoon and go into the evening. Gusty winds associated with this as well. Some clear spells there for Aberdeenshire, but otherwise a lot of cloud for the northern half of the UK. Nevertheless, we keep some clear spells going into the night time across the south, and because of that, once again, temperatures will fall away and some fog and frost patches will form. But the front that's bringing the heavy rain to northwest Scotland tends to sink south overnight into southern Scotland, Northern Ireland and then eventually northern England by dawn. A relatively weak feature, but it is going to bring a spell of rain and gusty winds, and it's introducing much colder air to parts of Scotland and Northern Ireland for the start of Saturday. In fact, we'll see a mix of rain, sleet and hail showers at lower levels for northern Scotland and some snow over the hills. The wind's picking up strength as well, with gales for the far north of Scotland. Meanwhile, much lighter winds further south, with a lot of cloud and some outbreaks of mostly light rain moving south. Highs of 13 Celsius in the south.
The latest GB News travel.
Good afternoon. Hello, I'm Jules Buckley. Let's go to County Durham firstly. The A167 currently shut between Sunderland Bridge and the Cock of the North roundabout in Langley Moor at the scene of a collision. Heavy fog reported on the M62 slow going around Rishworth Moor Junction 22. The Loughborough Road in Nottingham, the A60 now between Nottingham Knight Island and Ruddington closed in queuing. There's been a collision. Stop-start M1 29 Chesterfield up towards Bolsover 29A. The earlier breakdown there causing delay still back to junction 28. Herbert Road in West Hendon in London is currently blocked and queuing away from the A5. That's due to a bump there. And if you're heading towards Hythe in Kent, the Dymchurch Road, the A259, it's shut between Aldi and Martello Drive and queuing. There's an Overton vehicle there still being attended to. And that's the latest.
You can stay up to date throughout the day by visiting our website, gbnews.com.
Good afternoon, Britain. 37 minutes past 2 is the time, and much more coming up on today's programme, of course. But at 3 o'clock, it's Martin Daubney. So Martin joins us with a little tease. Martin, what have you got for us?
Hi guys, looking forward to the show today. So in Brussels, as we speak, a bunch of Brussels bureaucrats are huddling, plotting a freedom of movement deal with the UK. They say is a red line today. I'm going to expose this for the scares. It's a one-way ticket to Britain. I'll reveal the true numbers of what this could mean for the United Kingdom. Next up, I'm speaking to a turkey farmer who's spitting feathers. He feels that he's been stuffed by Rachel Reeves. Will they go on strike? Will we not get our Christmas turkey? I've got a chat with him, and no doubt he'll be giving me all the trimmings. And here's one for you. It might sound barking mad, but is your dog racist? Well, dog owners are concerned that this is a true story. It's actually a true story. Dog owners are concerned that their dogs are barking at people of colour. Their dogs are racist. They're taking them to be trained, to be reprogrammed. Is your dog racist? You couldn't make it up. That's Modern Britain, and it's on my show, 3 till 6.
Thank you, Martin. Well, maybe those dogs are guilty of non-crime hate incidents, do you think?
Oh, yeah, they'll have to have a police report. Well, it sounds like it's going to be a barking, clucking menagerie full of wonderful animal stories. Martin, looking forward to it.
How could you go anywhere else? Well, moving on, residents in Altrincham are furious after hundreds of male asylum seekers have been housed in the market town's Cresta Court Hotel. You could hear the shock from concerned residents when they learned last week at a town hall meeting that the asylum seekers might be receiving private healthcare alongside their free hotel accommodation.
So my understanding is they're contracted with GoDoc, which I think is the sort of nighttime service. It's a private doctor's system. And my understanding, that's not a statement of fact. But that should mean they won't be putting weight on our local
the local surgeries or the local doctors.
We're on 3 years waiting list hospital, and we're finding out that our service that's given to taxpayers in the UK isn't good enough.
Well, goodness me, you can hear the indignation from the crowd there. But the man speaking was indeed a man who organised that public meeting. He's been campaigning against these new sort of 300 or so migrants that have been placed in that hotel. Delighted to be joined now by Nathan Evans, the Conservative group leader at the local council. Nathan, thank you so much for making the time for us this afternoon. Firstly, this question mark over free private healthcare potentially given to these new migrants. I mean, it feels like it's a two-tier society.
It does feel like a two-tier. The local commissioning body for the NHS has sought out a separate company to provide healthcare for new residents. They're keen to say it's all part of the NHS service, but actually they're on a different track. So these hotel residents are on a different track to you, me, the general resident, ratepayers of Altrincham and Trafford, a different level of service, basically.
But Nathan, on the other hand, it's surely a good thing that these migrants are not putting pressure on local GP services, which I imagine if Altringham's like any other place in the country, it's quite hard to get a GP appointment.
And that's really what I did say that, but that doesn't take away from the fact that locally we've had our minor injuries unit closed in the centre of Altrincham. And actually, if you want a doctor's appointment, well, we all know you're in for a 2-3 week wait. But actually, if you happen to be a new resident at the Cresta Court, they're on tap with a whole different level of service.
Now, this is, of course, a significant consternation for the local community. I mean, these hundreds of male asylum seekers being plonked in a hotel in the middle of town. I understand close to a number of schools, close to 2 girls' schools, a primary school basically next door. There's huge concern from local residents about this.
Tremendous concern. Residents, businesses. We went on a tour of the town yesterday, and between the market centre, the actual hotel itself, 2 girls' schools, a primary school, and 100 different businesses, 10-minute walk, the whole lot. The businesses don't know what to do. The hotel itself used to cater for people visiting regularly. Manchester United fans, Altrincham Football Club fans, the local ice skating team fans would come. They'd arrive on a Friday, they'd go out in the town. So everybody, right down to the local chip shop, will take a massive hit. So the whole town is suffering to house, and that doesn't even mention the level of risk which the council and the local MP has refused to even acknowledge. So the safety of residents and the students is the prime concern of the residents that are speaking to me.
Now, Nathan, you are a local councillor, you're a Conservative local councillor. I understand that Trafford Council is currently controlled by the Labour group. When did you get to find out about the movement of these migrants into the local hotel? Were you the last to know? Was the whole council told at once?
The group leaders apparently received an email on the Saturday, which is, 2 weeks ago now. In fact, so it would be 3 weeks tomorrow. Encrypted message, never had an encrypted message from the council. Finally actually found out on Monday morning when a business club attendee was contacting me saying we've had all our meetings cancelled. What's going on at the Cresta Court? At which point, ring the council, finally get to the bottom of it to find out that it's being handed over. And within 48 hours, we had migrants arriving.
I mean, it is extraordinary, given that the government was elected with a campaign promise to close down the hotels, to end the hotel farce, and yet here we have more hotels being requisitioned effectively and absolutely full to the brim with hundreds of migrants. I mean, this is something that is very serious, clearly very concerning. I've got to ask you, Nathan, what are the next steps?
Well, keep the pressure on. We have 296, we're using the number 300, but it's 296 to be precise. They're all male, they're all single, they're all unattached. That's not ideal for a town centre next to a girls' school with 1,200 girls in it, is it really? So we are going to keep the pressure on, and we've got a petition which has been signed, 4,000 people at the moment. We're going to take that to the Home Office next week, again, to keep the profile of this up and push for, let's get these 300 people processed and let's get the place closed down and let's get it back to being a hotel serving the town, which is what it should be doing.
Nathan Evans, thank you so much for your time. Great to speak to you, and good luck with your campaign. Really difficult for local communities. I think most people have got a lot of sympathy with genuine refugees who are flying from war zones and persecution, but we just know that so many of these young men are, as you said, unattached, potentially causing disruption in the local area.
I understand that Trafford Council has actually had hotels before that have had women and children, refugees in them, and there wasn't a big kick-off from the town because these people aren't bigoted, these aren't people who have prejudice, these are people concerned about almost 300 single-loan, male, unidentified individuals who illegally entered the country and are now being given healthcare and housing and fed and stipends and all the rest of it.
And it's a completely unsuitable place to house people. I mean, it's a hotel. It's not set up for that kind of facility. It's extraordinary that the government can't build suitable facilities much more quickly, but then neither did the last government.
Or frankly, either approve these people into the country and therefore let them get jobs and earn their own living, or say, no, you're an illegal migrant, you can leave. I mean, why do we hold these people in stasis for so long? That's the beastly thing about it.
Indeed. Well, a spokesperson for Serco, which runs the hotel, said no decision had been made regarding healthcare provisions for the residents at the site. The Home Office defended its broader approach, saying this government inherited an asylum system under unprecedented strain, with thousands stuck in a backlog without their claims being processed. We remain absolutely committed to ending the use of hotels and for asylum seekers and continue to identify a range of accommodation options to minimise their use.
Well, there we go. Do you believe them? gbnews.com/your say. This is Good Afternoon Britain on GB News. Lots more coming up on today's show, including this curious fight. Yes, Mike Tyson is taking on a YouTuber called Jake Paul tomorrow. But will it be the fight of the century or a celebrity circus?
Martin Daubney, weekdays from 3 p.m.
We shot with the London Eye in the background, so it's quite an iconic shoot to do my cover of the Playboy magazine. So,
and you moved into the mansion for a while. Hugh called you the British Carmen Electra. You were one of his favourites, and it's renowned for its parties, of course. Over there, you must have had a few of those. Must have been wild times.
Fantastic parties, yeah. I mean, I met some incredible people. I will forever respect him and everyone at Playboy for the love and the support.
And you were on giant billboards, you were modelling for Nike, for Reebok, you're earning thousands of pounds a day.
Well,
absolutely like living the dream in terms of a model's lifestyle, and then things began to change.
Well, I've been living in Windsor for 4 years, and I can't get back into Windsor at the moment. The rents have gone ridiculous. I was paying $550 a month, and then the landlord just turned around one day and said I need to be paying $750. And I didn't really have a proper tenancy agreement, and I looked through it and I said, oh, can we get something in writing? And he was like, oh. So in the end, I wrote a tenancy agreement out from off the internet and I got it all signed. But then he went, if you're not going to pay the extra £250 a month, then you're going to have to move out. And I was like, well, you're going to have to give me 4 weeks. I can't just move out. I've got nowhere to go. And I think he thought he could just throw me out there and then... And he said, I've got someone that's going to move in that's going to pay £700-800 a month. So I went and got the 10, and I thought maybe this will be the way I can go for a few months or so, you know, and it was still summer a few months back when I became homeless. So, you know, I got the tent and I got all the cooking equipment and what have you from the money I got from some of the jobs I did. And I thought, you know what, I'm gonna go and be a free spirit for a bit, and I'm gonna have to just do my own thing. And you know what, it was the biggest mental relief to be able to have my own space. I mean, that was so liberating, absolutely.
GB News, the People's Channel.
Hi there, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm going to take a second to tell you all about my show, Dubes & Co. We start off with the issues of the day. We then bring in both sides of the argument. We get rid of the disrespect. And then you throw me into the mix. And trust me, I'll tell it exactly how it is. And then, of course, the magic ingredient, you at home. We mix it all together, and what have we got? In my opinion, the best debate show in town. Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on GB News, Britain's news channel.
It's Patrick Christie's Tonight, and here We do things differently.
It's explaining the absolute madness of this, doesn't it?
It's explosive.
I mean, this is very good.
It's lively.
850. Your government sat there, Sean, and it did nothing.
It's controversial.
And the Middle East has been in turmoil since before I was born.
It's everything you need to kickstart your evening.
Everyone's had their Weetabix tonight. I love to see it.
That's Patrick Christie's Tonight, weeknights from 9 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain. It's 10 to 3, and not long now until I'm sure you've all been on the edge of your chairs waiting for this. Yes, the YouTuber turned celebrity Jake Paul faces off against boxing legend Mike Tyson, all in a controversial fight in Dallas, Texas.
Well, joining us now is editor and founder of British Boxing News, Tim Rickson. Tim, who's your money on in this fight?
Hi there. I'm afraid to say I think it's on Jake Paul, and that really pains me to say that.
OK.
That's astonishing, though. I mean, Mike Tyson is a household name, a legend. You think he's going to be defeated by this upstart little YouTuber?
Well, I think his last fight was 19 years ago, and that was to Kevin McBride. And even then, he was shot. He was finished as a fighter. He was losing to. I think he lost 3 of his last 4 fights, and he was losing to people that at one time wouldn't even be fit to lace his boots. Now he's 58 years old, and it's almost 20 years on from when he originally acknowledged that he was no longer able to compete.
So you think the fact that he's so much older than Jake Paul will count for a lot more than the fact that he is much more experienced?
Yeah, I do, yeah, because, he's almost 60 years old, and he's fighting someone 31 years younger who's 27 years old, who's also very active, he's very fit, in his prime. And yeah, it's fine for Tyson to take part in exhibition bouts like he did against Roy Jones Jr. about 4 years ago. But for a professional boxing contest, I don't think it's a good idea.
Now, of course, this is a moment of huge celebrity. I mean, it's going to be the first sort of sporting thing streamed on Netflix. And it is a moment perhaps more of entertainment than great sporting value.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's going to bring, like YouTube boxing has already, it's going to bring a brand new audience to boxing, an audience that's obviously going to be a lot more casual than the avid boxing fan. So whether that audience will stick around or not, but I think it is going to be quite sad to see a YouTuber turned boxer defeat such a legendary boxing icon who was once an undisputed world heavyweight champion, the youngest heavyweight world champion in history of boxing. It's going to be quite sad to see that happen. Obviously, I don't want it to happen. I want Mike Tyson to win. But I just think the fitter, active, 31 years his junior, Jake Paul, is going to win this, just through fitness alone.
I mean, unless there is a major upset and it doesn't go the way that you're suggesting, this could be quite humiliating for Mike Tyson. I mean, what's in it for him? Obviously, I assume there is money involved in this, but in terms of his reputation and his legacy, this doesn't seem a wise move.
No, it doesn't really. And I think, obviously, money's a big motivator because I think he's probably getting, in excess of $20 million for this fight. But I think a lot of boxers, they want to still believe that they can compete, that they're still the person that they once was. And also the adulation that comes with boxing, I think they miss that quite often. That's why they come back.
Well, it's going to be a huge event, of course. We're expecting perhaps tens of millions of people to watch this. Really astonishing numbers. But Tim Rickson of British Boxing News, thanks so much for joining us here on Good Afternoon Britain. Appreciate your time.
Well, I wonder how many of our viewers will be watching that fight.
Well, I don't know, because, I mean, Jake Paul, this guy, he's got a product line, he's got a podcast. Donald Trump went on his podcast during the election. There's this sort of new alpha male sort of influencer vibe in the United States this is all feeding into.
And YouTube and other new media is shaking it all up, giving new people access to media. Very interesting. Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Absolutely. This has been Good Afternoon Britain, and of course, Martin Daubney's up next. Don't go anywhere.
A nice bright morning will generate a lovely warm day, right through to the evening. Boxed Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello and welcome to the latest update from the Met Office for GB News. A fine day for many of us out there. A lot of cloud in the sky, but some sunshine in the south as well as across parts of the northeast. But it's going to turn increasingly wet and windy in the far north and northwest for the rest of the day as a cold front sinks south. That's going to introduce a substantial change in the weather during the next few days across the whole of the UK. However, Friday ends with those clear spells in the south, good conditions for viewing the supermoon. And then, under those clear skies, temperatures fall away. A few pockets of frost and fog in the south by dawn. Meanwhile, the cold front sinks south.